Hey, it's me from the future. Cam Ward just won his third Super Bowl, but for some reason the NFL still has not given him a primetime game. What is going on, everybody? Welcome in to the reveal of the number 26 team in my preseason power rankings, as today we will take a deep dive into the Tennessee Titans. I think this team is a lot of people's kind of fascination project this year, if you will, that underdog team that is going to get some of those sleeper playoff nod predictions, and I think a team that a lot of people think could surprise this year. But obviously, with this 26th ranking as we head into the year, there's a lot of green lights that this team still needs to hit. And in today's video, we're going to go through all of those little sliding door moments, things that will need to go right for this team if they are going to have that ascension, that Cinderella season that I think is possible for this team. So very much looking forward to today's deep dive. Please do take a second to hit that like button down below. It really does help me out, supports this series, supports this channel, and make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any of these deep dives as I lead up to the number one team in my power rankings. And lastly, do not go anywhere because we have our first ever double threat guest interview. We, of course, brought James Foster, who's been a part of these Titans deep dives for years back, but also had to get Easton Freeze involved, who does an excellent job covering the Titans on their beat. So an awesome interview ahead towards the end of the video. Very much looking forward to sharing that with you guys as well. But without further ado, let's begin. As always in this series, we go through every aspect of the team through the roster and the coaching staff, and we begin every segment there looking at the offseason changes for this team and asking the big question, did they get better, worse, or stay the same at that spot? And we'll begin with the coaching staff here and mass overhaul, right? No surprise, of course, as they fired Brian Callahan along with his dad, the offensive line coach who followed him over here. This was a colossal disaster of a hire, really never even got off the ground. Felt like after the first year, this was a dead duck of a hire, and year two was just kind of treading tires until they eventually decided to make the change. Also, along with that, Nick Holtz, who was next to Brian Callahan as the offensive coordinator by title, also gone. And then Denard Wilson, who we just talked about as the defensive coordinator here going to the Giants in our last deep dive. So everybody out, and then in with the new here. They go with Robert Saleh as the retread head coaching hire option here. Fun hire. We'll get into that. Brian Dable, a big name offensive coordinator addition here. Along with him, Carmen Bricillo, who I discussed as a big loss for the New York Giants as the offensive line coach, despite Bricillo not being a big name necessarily, although he's getting more recognition around the league, and Bill Callahan being such a legacy hire and big name. I certainly think that's an upgrade along the offensive line coaching. And then Gus Bradley is going to come and coach underneath Robert Saleh. A familiar face there has been around Saleh going all the way back to the Seattle Legion of Boom days. But I am a huge fan of this staff. In fact, some people thought the Titans would be revealed already, and I can say almost with certainty there's probably been a couple rosters that might be a little better than the Titans here today, but this coaching staff is something I really do believe in, and I would say is the prominent reason why the Titans come in above some of these more recent teams like the Giants, where I had some skepticism of the coaching, the Jets. But I'm excited to really break this coaching staff down here as we do. Let's begin with Robert Saleh, the head coaching hire, and discuss kind of what his defense is going to look like here, and discuss where I have Saleh ranked among head coaches. Gets the 19th ranked position there. So a very good starting point just in terms of stacking the cards for all these head coaches. But it's especially reflected where I show the defensive coach rankings for pass defense coaching, especially the Titans come inside the top 10. That's how highly I view Robert Saleh as a defensive coach, both with the Jets, although Things got away towards the end of it, but he came in and did an excellent job building up that Jets defense. And then he really restored, I would say, confidence in his coaching capabilities going back to San Francisco, making chicken salad out of you-know-what last year with the Niners. Just did a great job and got him back into the head coaching position, maybe even quicker than we expected. So ranking 6th to 9th for pass defense coaching. I think from a run defense standpoint, that is, especially when you look at those Jets defenses, taking some steps backwards at the end of the Robert Saleh regime, opened up a few more questions about run defense, but still did a good job with the Niners last year, considering what they had to work with the injuries they had. It's not like they always sucked against the run with the Jets. Ranking 11th to 18th for run defense coaching. So out the gate, just from a head coach and defensive coaching standpoint, you can see all right, we're kind of talking a next level of respect for a head coach than some of these previous deep dives that we've had, where it's a little bit more question marks. Robert Saleh hasn't reached that top shelf, certainly, but I feel really good about this hire from what you're hiring him to do. Number one, as a culture raiser, just having that defensive mindset. This is a guy that players listen to and respect and get fired up to play for. Even if some of the Jets of it all interfered and things got away from him a little bit at the end of that Jets tenure, I still have a lot of confidence that Robert Saleh is going to bring that to the table. And maybe that he did learn from whatever little mishaps might have happened with the Jets. And then, from a scheming point of view, look, at the end of the day, Robert Saleh is actually, not only has he proven that he can coach some defenses, he's actually at the top of one of the most respected coaching trees in the league today. For all the praise that guys like DeMeco Ryans and Jeff Hafley receive, Robert Saleh is the architect of that system and that mentality on the defensive side of the ball. And like I said, the proof is in the pudding with so many of the defenses that he's coached. So this is a highly respectable hire, even if I'm not ranking him as a top 10 head coach, or maybe not necessarily the most incredible head coach hire of all time. I'm pretty excited about what he brings to the table, especially from a floor standpoint, and just kind of, getting an adult in the room in Tennessee. They've had a really hard time since they let go of Mike Vrabel, kind of getting back to that physical, high culture mentality as a respectable NFL organization. And I do think Robert Saleh is going to get them back on that track. Now, we can hint at Gus Bradley being a part of this. He's more here just as a veteran voice in the building at this point. Robert Saleh, ironically, came up underneath Gus Bradley there during those Legion of Boom defenses. And things have certainly, they've gone down their different paths. Robert Saleh has really innovated into a much different scheme that I'm gonna talk about what this scheme is going to look like here in just a second. Whereas Gus Bradley eventually ran his course throughout his different stops, lastly with the Indianapolis Colts, because he never really did adapt. He very much was my way or the highway. We're going to run cover 3 like we did in Seattle. And even if you know it's coming, we're going to go about this with the approach that you can't stop it, even though those Colts defenses were more bad than good. But that's not to say Gus Bradley doesn't know a thing or two about defense and can't provide some good feedback and a good voice in the building underneath Robert Saleh's vision for this defense. As long as Robert Saleh is organizing what things are going to look like from a coverage structure and scheme point of view, I'm not really worried about the negative impact of some of the issues we've seen with Gus Bradley just kind of spamming cover 3 like it's local play now game in Madden. But yes, let's talk a little bit about what Robert Saleh's scheme looks like. And Saleh's defense is definitely not what it used to be in those Seattle 3 early days of him coming up as a young coach. It is very much more in that kind of modern meta, the pre-snap, 2-shell, post-snap rotation, kind of Fangio style scheme from a coverage standpoint on the back end. And naturally, with those 2-shell structures, you're going to see a lot of cover 4, off-zone quarters. and splitting into cover 6 as well as a bit of a changeup off of that, where it's cover 4 on one half of the field and cover 2 on the other side of the field. So kind of that off zone, split safety zone structure. Now, you look at San Francisco last year with all of the injuries, they had to get a little bit more creative, and Saleh maybe resorted to his roots a little bit and hit that cover 3 button quite a lot. Now, it's not uncommon for these split safety systems to still run a lot of cover 3. It's just you might be starting and likely will be starting in a pre-snap 2-shell look. So you're still getting that confusion element. But when your D-line and your linebackers are depleted by injuries, yes, you might want that extra safety rotating down in the box a little bit more to stop the run. You might be getting picked on underneath a little bit more. And cover 3 did make sense for the Niners a little bit more than cover 4. But when he was with the Jets, they were a very cover 4 heavy team. And still last year with the Niners, they ran the 4th most cover 4 in the league, the 9th most cover 6. So it was basically a full-on cover 3, cover 4, cover 6 defense with the Niners, and that's pretty consistent with how Saleh has called his cover structures, running man occasionally when necessary and when they have the right corners to do that. But I do think for Titans fans, looking at what you can expect, at least the coverages on the back end to look like, we have a pretty good idea of what you're going to get here with Saleh coming in. And then another thing with whether it's Robert Saleh or D'Amico Ryans or Jeff Hafley, everybody underneath Robert Saleh's coaching tree is these teams don't actually like to blitz a lot, but they want to still create that feeling of discomfort for an offensive line. So there's really 2 ways to do that. And most prominently, what we've seen with Robert Saleh and kind of his earlier time with the Niners especially, and Chris Kachurik, the D-line coach there as well, I think it's a lot of credit for this, is really ramping up stunt usage. A term I've said on this channel before, and admittedly first heard it from Robert Mays of The Ringer, but creating that idea of running into a hurricane, slanting guys at the line, loops, twists, not just as a part of your pass rushing games, but even against the run, running some of those stunts and just causing chaos at the line of scrimmage, getting athletes shooting gaps, messing up, run blocking rules and schemes. And I think that's the perfect term for it, honestly. So again, shout out Robert Mays for first coining that. But that definitely plays into rushing the passer as well, creating advantages for rushers, whether they're going unblocked on a loop or a stunt, or just creating angles for guys as well as offensive linemen have to pass off those ET, TT, different types of stunts that will be very common with the Titans here and have been with Robert Saleh. But another way that you can kind of cause some of that chaos and make it feel like you are under more pressure than you actually are is just lining guys up, double A gap, mug looks, different amoeba fronts, especially on third downs where you're not actually blitzing. You might still only be rushing 4, but it's a little bit more unclear who necessarily is coming after the quarterback. I would say there's a little bit less of that in a Robert Saleh defense than maybe like a Mike McDonald type of system that we've talked about being pretty damn similar, honestly, from an overall philosophy. A big reason for that is that a main difference between Robert Saleh's system and, say, Vic Fangio or Mike McDonald is you're definitely talking about more of that 4-2 style front as opposed to a more of a 3-4 mentality with how you're lining guys up, specifically having your defensive ends putting their hand in the dirt. And naturally, just with those edge rushers with their hands in the dirt, you're getting a little bit less kind of movement and creativity with your pre-snap blitz looks. It's a little bit more like we're going to line it up the way we do it. And a lot of times that's like real wide 9 fronts. So that's another schematic wrinkle that can put your pass rushers in an advantageous situation is, to really simplify what a wide 9 front is it's spreading out your defensive line, forcing the offensive line to handle a lot more space. And if you're going to lean towards maybe more athletic interior defensive linemen, which is absolutely a staple of a Robert Saleh style defense, is more undersized athletic interior defensive linemen, giving them more space to work against more spread out offensive linemen from these types of looks. and giving those open runways for those wide 9 techniques, which are going to be your edge players. Just, outside of the tackle is a 5 technique. Outside of the tight end is a 7 technique. A 9 technique is way the hell out there. That is typically going to be only seen when there's a second tight end playing off the first tight end, right? To really simplify things there. But getting into those 9 techniques for your edge rushers, even if there isn't necessarily a second tight end out there, is really forcing those tackles to launch out wide and protect that corner. So then you start to implement stunts and loops and games and a blitzing element behind that. Again, another schematic wrinkle really emphasized by the Robert Saleh system to use the scheme to benefit your defensive line, largely from a pass rushing perspective, but they do some very creative things from a run defense perspective with those looks on earlier downs as well. So that's the system and the coaching you can expect here on the defensive side of things for Tennessee. But I still got to get going talking about Brian Daboll, man. And man, it's feeling more and more like I'm more on an island with liking Brian Daboll. Just things did not end well with the Giants, and there's certainly relevant criticisms. And Giants fans, I hear you. Like, there were problems with him as a head coach, and I can't hide from that. Like, his temperament, just from a culture building and being an adult in the room, there's a lot of questions, right? Like, he's a hothead. I can't deny that. And I'm not saying the Giants at this point made a mistake moving on from Brian Daboll, but I am saying he's a loss from a offensive designing, play calling, quarterback developing standpoint. I still believe that Brian Daboll has an excellent capability in that sense and an excellent resume. I mean, he was a prominent part of Josh Allen's, honestly, and I liked Josh Allen a lot as a prospect, but he needed a lot of miraculous development, especially to get to the point where he's at now. Brian Daboll was a huge part of that, but it wasn't just that. He stepped in, won Coach of the Year. I mean, talking about making chicken salad out of chicken feces, he did that in that first year with the Giants. No receivers, shaky offensive linemen, Daniel Jones. They were a double-digit team that won a playoff game, and Brian Daboll won Coach of the Year in that first year. Yes, things started to deteriorate as they had literally no roster talent. Some horrible drafts on top of that. Daniel Jones injury problems. But then last year, even amidst everything, Brian Daboll was the one that banged the drum for Jackson Dart, and I think got a lot out of a young Jackson Dart before they eventually parted ways with Brian Daboll. I believe in this coach, man, and I think he is one of the better gets from a offensive coordinator, play caller position that any team acquired this offseason, and I'm frankly very optimistic of him getting to work with Cam Ward in an infrastructure here that is maybe not amazing, as we'll talk about, but better than what he's had for a long time with the Giants. It honestly is. And a quarterback in Cam Ward that he really wanted in that draft. He infamously was willing to give up the farm to go up and get Cam Ward, and the Titans said, no, we also need a quarterback. Eventually, those two parties found their way together, right? And I really like that just from how everything lines up. I think the narrative of it all is very fun and a lot of reason to believe in it. And I'm pretty optimistic that this is going to work out, man. And that is reflected in the coaching rankings as well on the offensive side of things here. Okay, maybe not elite rankings, but very, very respectable. And like I said, certainly a step above most of the teams we've talked about to this point, where the Titans come in and they haven't seen this in a long time, really since Arthur Smith left. And that's another name that gets people going. But Arthur Smith did a hell of a job here for the Titans. But for pass game coaching, they rank top 15, so 9th to 15th in a cluster there. Likewise for run game coaching, 7th to 13th. Brian Daboll, to me, very balanced in terms of has shown a lot of positives, not just designing the passing game and getting young quarterbacks or below average quarterbacks in Daniel Jones's case to play well, but from a run game standpoint as well, getting very creative, which can stem into more of a schematic conversation on what Brian Daboll's offense actually looks like, with a lot of shotgun run game stuff, much more of that modern pro spread approach to things, as opposed to that sort of Shanahan style under center outside zone mentality. But one thing that definitely comes to my mind with Brian Daboll is his ability to implement the quarterback run game into things. We saw a ton of that with Jackson Dart. Honestly, Daniel Jones was very underrated at that. That was a huge part of that miracle rookie Brian Daboll season with the Giants. Obviously, Josh Allen, incredible at it. So, of course, read options, but not just that, like getting behind pulling guards and going QB power and QB sweep and trap and getting really creative in the QB run game is an underrated aspect of what Brian Daboll brings to the table. And you can do some of that with Cam Ward. You certainly can, and Miami did when Ward was in college. But the pass game as well, I do think works really well to simplify things for the quarterback. You get a lot of those quick outlets, like bubble screens, and using that quick game as an extension of your run game, a lot of times from the gun. But Brian Daboll's also really good at kind of creating those layered leveling reads for quarterbacks that are just natural as a part of their progression as they scan the middle of the field effectively, and can ultimately open up opportunities for explosive plays too. Putting defenses in a bind where they have to, it's a lot of those, kind of mesh style concepts where you have guys running at each other, crossing the field. Although Daboll likes to kind of extend those. You think mesh and it's like, okay, one guy's running 3 yards and one guy's running 5 yards depth. Daboll kind of takes the core philosophy of mesh and will extend it down the field a little bit. It might be a 10-yard crosser one way and then a 15-yard dig, or a deep cross coming the other way, and really put these match zone defenses in a bind, while simultaneously, it's natural for the quarterback, if you're reading that part of the field, it's pretty easy to kind of break down where these safeties are rotating and which one of those crossers you got to go to. And that's just one of many concepts that Brian Daboll will run, of course, but it's something that has stood out to me throughout his coaching time, that's a big part of what he likes to do. So just good pass game design in general. I'm excited, man. And I think getting to be an offensive coordinator instead of being the head coach, and especially underneath a Robert Saleh, that I think is going to do a very good job running the organization, being the adult in the room. I think Daboll's going to be allowed to be himself here without it really spiraling things from the team's mentality standpoint. It just doesn't have that same effect on the team morale when it's just the offensive coordinator losing his mind, as opposed to the head coach kind of getting out of control a little bit. So I think it's a really natural fit, and I'm optimistic for this hire, certainly. So big fan of this coaching staff. Now, before we go any further here, I want to thank the sponsor for today's deep dive, and that is SeatGeek. You guys, the summer months are here, and in case you haven't heard, the World Cup is also here. So if there's World Cup matches in your area and you want to go check out a game, SeatGeek has got you covered there. But also, if you want to go enjoy the sun and catch a baseball game or concerts, SeatGeek has countless concert options for you as well. They're the #1 ticketing app, and for good reason. Their app is easy to use. They color code everything. So if you like the color coding system for these deep dives, the green means good, red means bad. Well, there you go. You know how to use SeatGeek. Just look for those green dots. You're getting the best prices, not just within the SeatGeek app, but always market competitive prices as well. You'll get the tickets right there in your SeatGeek app. You don't have to go through frustrating communication chains and third-party emails just to find your seats as you approach the gate. They make it nice and easy for you. And right now, if you use code TFG10, you will also save up to $20 on your next purchase on top of all that. So a big thanks to SeatGeek. Have fun wherever it is you guys are headed, and let's get back to the deep dive. So now it's time to dive into this Titans roster. We'll begin at quarterback, taking a look at their offseason changes. It's not nothing. They are staying neutral from their changes because obviously this centers around Cam Ward. But they did bring in Mitchell Trubisky over from Buffalo. And Will Levis also comes back healthy after kind of quietly missing all of last season. So he's here, at least for now. But let's talk about Cam Ward. And just off the bat, I have Cam Ward ranked 25th as quarterback here heading into the season. But it's not about that, right? It is about how much he can develop and settle in here next to Brian Daboll and climb in those rankings. Still so much to prove here for the young Cam Ward. And I keep coming back to this talking point with his rookie season and how I view it. And it is that he kept his head above water amidst a monsoon, amidst a nightmare situation. And in fact, it reminded me a lot of Drake May's rookie season as well, where you saw so many of the flashes, reasons to get excited about the player. And you come out of the year with a lot of encouraging talking points, right? The organization believes in him. We saw enough. This guy has a good head on his shoulder. He's going to be our franchise quarterback someday. Yet you watch the tape and it was a lot of good, bad, and the ugly type of stuff. And that was the same with Drake May in his rookie season. I'm not saying Cam Ward goes and is, MVP runner-up and goes to the Super Bowl this year. That's obviously a unique situation, but still a lot of similarities to what we saw with Drake May in his rookie season. And that's kind of the optimistic spin on it, right? That's the hopeful approach to what you can see here from Cam Ward in year two, where I would compare the 2025 Titans to the 2024 Patriots. Complete disaster, a coach that got fired, not really any consistency from a play calling standpoint, receiver standpoint, bad offensive line. This was the definition of how not to prepare for a rookie quarterback and what not to drop a rookie quarterback into. And we've seen so many young quarterbacks get dropped into a bad environment, develop bad tendencies, spiral by the end of the final season, and not be able to build any momentum moving forward. I don't think that was the case with Cam Ward. I think Cam Ward got stronger as the year went on. Yes, had some ugly moments, didn't win a lot of football games, and has a lot of stuff to work on that I'm going to talk about, but did remind people as well how incredible of a playmaker he is, how great his traits are, and that he will persevere through this type of stuff. This is one of the biggest selling points on Cam Ward as a prospect, was like, this dude had to start at incarnate word and go through multiple stops in college, and was faced, unlike a lot of young quarterbacks was faced with adversity earlier on and understood how to overcome it and have that confidence that he can get through and see the light at the end of the tunnel. And that matters so much for these quarterbacks, and might be one of Cam Ward's best traits, is the confidence that this is a tough dude mentally speaking, and he understands what it takes to get in the lab and develop and be a better football player. That all ties into this, certainly. Now, like I said, he enters the year ranked 25th, which isn't horrible necessarily, but obviously not where he needs to be, where Titans fans want him to be, and how good of a quarterback he's going to need to be for the Titans to be a playoff team and beyond, right? So there were some things, certainly from Cam Ward, that need to get better. Number one is more straightforward, just like from so many young quarterbacks, you would say the same thing, where you did see some of those pass-ups on open wide receivers, just not taking the simple throws at times, playing in structure, the processing and decision-making side of things that naturally needs to get better. That's straightforward, and you would say that about essentially every young quarterback not named Joe Burrow. Yes, that needs to get better. I think as well, one thing you come back to on Cam Ward is those sort of like YOLO plays, the over-aggressive decision-making. And it's not the end of the world. And in fact, I don't want him to lose all of it, because the playmaking and the risk-taking, the gunslinger mentality is such a selling point on Cam Ward's game. It's very similar to like Jordan Love, where he's a very aggressive decision maker. And even if you get memed on Twitter for some really stupid throws that don't work out for you, a lot of people might not celebrate 5 times over the incredible throws you make into tight throwing windows that so many quarterbacks are afraid to challenge. I don't want to lose that entirely, but it is about finding that proper balance with Cam Ward. Ward was 20th out of 26 quarterbacks in turnover-worthy play percentage. If we're going to compare him to Jordan Love for a lot of those similar tendencies, Jordan Love was tied for 5th in turnover-worthy play rate. So even if you make some aggressive mistakes you want back, he needs to limit the amount of those that do show up on tape and just continue to develop. And that ties into the processing and decision-making, understanding when a play is dead, what he can get away with, what he can't get away with at the NFL level, still trying to find that proper balance without losing the playmaking instincts that he does have. And then the third thing he needs to get better at is the accuracy, and shout out to our wonderful guest, James Foster, does a great job breaking this down in the interview as well, so I don't want to steal all of his excellent talking points, but you do definitely need to see him be on target more often. And I do think that when you are playing with backup young wide receivers, as he was last year, when you change coordinators, fire your coach mid-season, so much of accuracy is also just timing and having guys open. It's so easy for people to take, in hindsight, all of these like charted accuracy, stats and graphs and analytics and be like, yep, see, Cam Ward, hilariously inaccurate. But a lot of times it's like, well, yeah, that pass was inaccurate because Ward's only option was to throw a tight window pass and kind of throw it where it was either going to be his guy or nobody else. And yeah, it was an inaccurate pass, but was it necessarily his worst option on the play? Oftentimes, no. Or deep passes, like a good deep threat at wide receiver is going to be able to create that vertical separation, and you put it out there, the receiver will adjust and give you an accurate pass. So much of being an accurate quarterback from a charting perspective, and believe me, I charted QB accuracy for PFF, so I'm very familiar with this. So much of this has to do with the infrastructure and the wide receivers as well. So I didn't think Cam Ward's tape was like alarming in terms of inaccuracy, but certainly there are throws where he's putting a little bit too much on it. There were a couple of those moments where it's like, okay, yes, you're trying to put it, like I said, where it's either going to be your guy or nobody else, but an NFL throw there is still to put it on your guy and make it a more catchable pass. So there's certainly some of that. And then also, like, if we're talking about a lot of crossing routes and deep mesh and that kind of stuff with Brian Daboll, you want to see Cam Ward throw these horizontal routes out in front of his guys more often instead of at the back hip pocket, which is going to lead to more drops and a lack of rack opportunities. So I do think you want to talk a little bit about like Josh Allen being probably the best example underneath Brian Daboll of developing accuracy, which was his biggest issue at Wyoming. And honestly, if you broke down strengths and weaknesses for Cam Ward versus Josh Allen, gonna look like a similar scouting report. But certainly if you want Cam Ward to be a top 10 quarterback and really be worth that 101 pick that the Titans spent on him, all the processing and decision-making can come along. But if he's not a more accurate passer, that's an underlying kind of floor raiser that's kind of a prerequisite for being a, let's say, a tier 2 or better quarterback by my definition. So you want to look at what Josh Allen did with Brian Daboll, Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson, other examples of quarterbacks that really improved their accuracy from what they were as younger versions of themselves. And historically speaking, it's harder for these quarterbacks to improve on accuracy, but there's so many tools now to get better at it. There's actually, going back to Buffalo and ironically Mitch Trubisky a little bit here, they're in the Bills Hard Knocks. There's a really cool look at the science of modern quarterback accuracy mechanics coaching, where they can boil this thing down to a couple of like nodes in your body and be like, yeah, you just need your elbow to be whatever 5% more in when you throw or whatever, and like really identify why some of these passes aren't going where the quarterback needs it to go. So we're at a stage in the modern NFL where you can develop accuracy much better than historically speaking, but it still doesn't happen for everybody. So that's going to be a big thing to keep an eye on with Cam Ward. Beyond that, I feel like his selling points are exactly what they were coming out as a prospect, exactly why he went with the number one pick. And it's not that hard to see like what's good about Cam Ward. The arm talent's fantastic. His pocket presence and spatial awareness, that was my favorite thing from him. It is Aaron Rodgers, Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen-esque. He has that natural feel for space as the play is breaking down to extend. That is that sixth sense, that superpower that really all of the game's elite quarterbacks do have at the end of the day. You pair that with his mobility. He's a dense guy. He can step out of sacks and elude sacks. That side of things is so easy to sell. And while he makes some aggressive decisions and has some sloppy looking plays, he's a more cerebral passer than he often gets credit for. Like, I don't really have questions about his ability to get through reads. I think he proved that in that final year at Miami. Like, if you give him a proper structure, he can hit his first read consistently. He can play on time. I think it was such a disaster last year that it was harder on him. But there were still plenty of examples of him running quick game, trusting the offense. And I think Brian Daboll is going to be able to get a lot of that out of him. And like going through full field progressions and making pro reads, like he will do that. I'm not really worried about that side of things. Yes, he can be a little bit aggressive at times. But I'm really excited to see where this goes, man. He's a really fun prospect. And like I made fun of in the cold open, like nobody talks about this guy. And I don't get it. He doesn't get any primetime games. He kind of infamously got like no coverage on draft day because it was all about Travis Hunter and Shedeur Sanders, even though it was Cam Ward's draft. Didn't get any primetime games on the schedule this year. And it's pretty crazy for a number one pick with this much upside to just fly under the radar like that. And I think it'd be really fun if things come together. Like, I think it's possible for him to kind of shove a middle finger to, big media and the NFL schedule makers and all that and be like, well, you're going to have to pay attention to me now. Like, I'm absolutely pulling for it. There's a world where this doesn't work out. I don't want to just say like it was all rainbows and butterflies as a rookie. Like, there's definitely a path where Cam Ward just isn't consistent enough, isn't accurate enough, and it doesn't work out. I'm not betting on that as an outcome. I do think he's going to at least be a very good NFL quarterback. And if he can improve some of the accuracy and decision-making stuff, I still think Cam Ward can be a difference-making, let's just say, tier 2 type of quarterback and a top 10 QB ultimately at the end of the day. So we'll see where things land at the end of the year. He is, without saying, the biggest wild card for this team, for this ranking, how their season goes, the biggest of second seasons for Cam Ward here. As far as the backups go, Mitch Trubisky has settled down as an adequate NFL backup. His game has matured and he's stuck around despite everything that happened in Chicago. And then you do have Will Levis. I wouldn't be surprised if Will Levis kind of goes the Malik Willis path and ends up somewhere behind a veteran quarterback. And, I think you talk about pocket presence and game feel. Will Levis has none of that. And it's just such a debilitating factor for his game, but he has a wicked arm and a crazy release and he's big as hell. So like, don't want to quite write him off entirely, but it's certainly not looking great. And then Hendon Hooker is even here as well. Infamous overdraft by the Detroit Lions. But let's carry on to the rest of this roster, pun intended there, as we go to the players receiving carries in this backfield. Not a ton of changes this offseason with the running backs. They're sticking by Tony Pollard, Tyjae Spears. They do add the polarizing Nicholas Singleton out of Penn State in the 5th round. We'll talk about him. But I said neutral at running back as well, which makes sense. You got the same two guys here. It's a very solid backfield, and it comes in that ranking that we've seen for a few teams already of just good backfields. Nothing crazy, but is going to allow this running back, this run game to operate and have success if everything else is in place. A B- grade, ranking 21st to 27th. Now, I don't think the Titans' RB room has the upside that we put other teams in this category like Cleveland and New York, who have exciting young backs coming back from injuries there. Obviously the same ranking here, but you much more know what you're getting, I think, at this point with the combination of Tony Pollard and Tyjae Spears. And that's perfectly fine, even if this maybe isn't the most exciting conversation, or if it doesn't necessarily need to be the longest conversation. Tony Pollard, though, very underrated player in many ways. Very quietly has had 4 straight 1,000-yard seasons, 2 in Dallas, 2 here in Tennessee, despite how bad things have been. And look, if you're getting 1,000 yards, right around 4.5 yards a carry over 2 years in Tennessee, that's a pretty good selling point for the fact that like you at least can elevate a run game a little bit. You know, no one's talking about Tony Pollard as this superstar game-changing back, but he's balanced, man. He's got a little bit of everything. I think he has really proved, like, because earlier in Dallas when he was Zeke's running mate, it's like, oh, does he really have the vision and completeness as a runner to be this number one back? And like, yeah, he does. He has plenty of contact balance and enough ability to lower his shoulder and run behind his pads. He's got vision to run any sort of run concept. He has very good breakaway speed. If you do get him out in space, he's got enough shiftiness. He checks every box you could want from a starting running back, and maybe he hasn't taken too many steps above that in those different categories, but really nice player, man. And he gets involved in the receiving game too. Was kind of famous for being part receiver coming out of Memphis. And he's been very dependable in that sense throughout his career as well. Even if here in Tennessee, he's taken a little bit more of a backseat in the receiving game because of Tyjae Spears being his running mate. That's not necessarily what they ask as much of. It's more of early down, almost like workhorse type of stuff for Pollard. So he's your starter, and then Tyjae Spears is the perfect complement. He has his deficiencies. He's not the biggest guy. He doesn't quite have the power that Tony Pollard does, and he fell in the draft because of durability concerns with his lower body. And we've seen in his NFL career, Tyjae Spears has missed a decent amount of games. So that has aged, unfortunately. The doctors were right, and you know, Spears ends up, I think, a late 3rd round pick. And like, for example, he was, I think, a 2nd round grade for me. I compared him to Aaron Jones coming out. I didn't know the medicals were that bad. But yeah, if you're unable to stay on the field or project as a, you know, someone that can get 200 touches in a season, you're going to be defaulted to more of a backup role. But Tyjae Spears in this type of role is one of the more useful backups in the league. Number one, just being in a backup role, you're not going to have that exposure to hits and the injury exposure. So you can, like we saw last year, hopefully get a majority of a season from Tyjae Spears. He played 13 games last year, just over 100 touches. But role-wise, as a change of pace runner of the ball, he's shown to be a very solid backup running back. Solid vision, very solid shiftiness, not absurdly explosive or powerful or anything like that, but he's not like one of these change of pace backs where he comes into the game and you know what type of run concept is coming or that they aren't going to run at all. He's enough of a threat that you still have to take him seriously. And then as a receiving back, this is where Tyjae Spears is quite underrated, and he's been so good at this that they have taken, like I said, a lot of that receiving game workload off of Tony Pollard's plate. But Spears caught 45 passes last year, and while the total yardage number is just okay, 6 yards per reception, 264 yards, he actually was number 1 in the NFL in missed tackles forced per reception, ahead of Bijan Robinson. So maybe not as this crazy big play threat as a receiving threat, but as a check down option that you can flip the ball out to on 3rd and 5, and he can consistently make that slot corner or weak side backer, whoever it is, make him miss and just get, what maybe is an expected 3-yard catch, turn it into a 6-yard catch, like is his average, and move the chains, keep drives alive. He's one of the best in the league as a check down option. I think there is a lot more to be unlocked as well. having him run more routes, angle routes, and being getting him out in space a little bit more, maybe even through more creative screen designs as well, where I think Brian Daboll is successful. So I expect, as long as he can stay healthy, Tyjae Spears is very much going to be a factor in the receiving game, and that's kind of fast forwarding the conversation a little bit. Things get a little bit murky in terms of where to discuss these players and their skill sets. Our next section here is going to be discussing the weaponry, but you can certainly apply Spears' impact in the receiving game towards how this passing game comes together. And it's also worth noting too that one thing I didn't mention with Cam Ward as a huge strength of his that showed in his final year at Miami and last year is his ability to get to his check down very late in his progression to avoid sacks and to help keep drives alive and give his offense a chance. It's pretty spectacular. Like, he has these off angle, miraculous throws just to get the ball to a Tyjae Spears or Tony Pollard in the flat. And while it might only be an 8-yard reception at the end of the day, those can be back-breaking plays that really demoralize a defense because you think you've got him, and then all of a sudden Tyjae Spears just juked you out and you got a whole new set of downs. So it really is a nice pairing, especially to me in kind of a modern pro spread, shotgun-oriented Brian Daboll offense, as we're going to see here. Now, we do have to talk about Nicholas Singleton, who was a 5th-round pick and a polarizing one at that. And he was one of your way too early mock draft superstars, that type of guy, big-name college player that really disappointed. And this draft class was a historically bad running back class, if not the worst of all time. And it led to some very polarizing conversations with people looking for anybody to be that sleeper gem out of this draft. And Nicholas Singleton's name got brought up a lot because he's fast as hell and he's about 220 pounds. And there's going to be an obvious intrigue with that. But look, I have been doing this for a while at this point. I can't say that I've ever seen a running back with worse vision than Nicholas Singleton. I mean, it was like Cleveland Browns, Trent Richardson, like worst version of DeAndre Swift, bad. Probably even worse than that. Like, it is literally the best way I can describe Nicholas Singleton is that you are playing with Saquon Barkley in Madden, right? Great speed, all the traits in the world. However, anytime the ball gets snapped, you have to put a blindfold on and see what happens. That's literally like what it's like watching Nick Singleton run. And it's not just picking the right lanes and being a successful runner. It's like out in space too. He has no creativity, no understanding of shiftiness and how to set up angles and make guys miss. It is just full speed ahead, blindly. And I don't know how you fix that. I don't know that you do fix that. And that's ultimately why he was so disappointing, why he was a day 3 draft pick. However, here's what I'll say about Nicholas Singleton in a positive light. He has usefulness, in my opinion, for what he is as a 5th-round pick, not as this, like, if things go right, he's going to be a superstar. No, more as like, can he be a good role player for us, like so many day 3 draft picks are? I think as a return man, and yes, you have Chimere DK there, but him and DK in the same return backfield could be explosive. And he did do a good job returning kicks at Penn State. And for all of his deficiencies as a runner, he checked a lot of boxes as a receiving threat. He actually ran good routes out of the backfield, showed good hands, showed that speed can be a problem. And he wasn't a bad pass blocker. So very interesting prospect, but and yeah, you have Spears right now in that role, but if long-term Spears isn't going to be here or if he gets hurt, I think Singleton as a pass catcher could absolutely work. And then, yeah, if you're able to develop his vision, then we can start to have a conversation about him. But a fascinating prospect. And ultimately, for all the hate I gave Nicholas Singleton, it was weird for me to say, yeah, not a horrible use of a 5th-round pick. And then you have Michael Carter. He's, probably practice squad depth, but he is very Tyjae Spears-esque for a lot of the things we talked about with Spears. You have some more like true goal line options with Julius Chestnut, Khalil Mullings. So you've got some different types there, and honestly some fun names as backups, even if nothing is overly interesting if you have to go that deep into your depth. But there's your running back room. It's a very solid group. Probably not a unit we look back on at the end of the year and we're like, oh my God, the Titans backfield was unstoppable. But whether this team season goes right or wrong, I'd be pretty surprised if we talk about the running back room being what drove the Titans season one way or another. But let's get to the true pass catchers here, discuss the weaponry for the Titans. Looking at their offseason changes there, big shakeup at wide receiver. Really no losses, not like they had much to lose to begin with, but Van Jefferson no longer with the team, played about half their snaps last year. Upgrades, pretty big. Obviously, Carnell Tate with the number 4 pick in the draft, big expectations for him. One thing with the Titans is they gave so much money in free agency to just like solid players. Like Wan'Dale Robinson's a nice addition to this team. Severe overpay, but still a nice player to drop into the mix here. They gave him about $20 million a year, which is crazy to me. But he is coming off a 1,000-yard season with the Giants. And then you got to mention Calvin Ridley as well, who missed a severe amount of time last year and is supposed to be back healthy this year. With just 24% of snaps played last year, he qualified to show up as an addition there. And then the tight end room, seeing some shakeup. I said neutral at tight end, whereas I said upgraded at wide receiver, obviously. They lose Chigakonkwo, who was a decent utility kind of receiving entity for them. But they bring in more of a blocking-oriented Daniel Bellinger following Brian Daboll over. They also add Kylan Granson and kind of like a flex fullback type, kind of a Chigakonkwo replacement from a blocking aspect in Jaren Kanak. But yeah, I said neutral. It's more of a blocking-oriented group with a Bellinger compared to a receiving-oriented group with a Chigakonkwo. So hard to say upgraded or downgraded, more just like it's different. But let's get into it. And while I said the running back room more kind of is what it is, probably not going to make or break the team's season, I would say outside of Cam Ward, these weapons in tandem with Cam Ward are the biggest wild card for the Titans this year, where we're going to have to see some green lights if the Titans are going to have this kind of fun breakthrough season. Certainly a lot of potential here. And the B- grade on this unit itself is not horrible, so you do have a decent starting point there, but they do rank 23rd to 27th for weaponry across the NFL, and you're definitely hoping that they finish higher than that. And the biggest reason for that hope is going to be Carnell Tate, the 4th overall pick in this draft out of Ohio State. A pretty well-documented rookie at this point. And I would imagine most of you watching this video were draft fans and are relatively familiar with what Carnell Tate is supposed to bring to the table here, man. But in case you're not, I see someone that in a best case scenario can be probably this team's T. Higgins. Definitely projects into more of that X wide receiver skill set as an outside receiver. And like a T. Higgins or a Mike Williams, someone that, okay, maybe he's not the fastest guy. Maybe you don't ask him to run the most diverse set of routes. And honestly, the biggest issue with Carnell Tate is he brings almost nothing to the table as a run after catch threat. However, he does run good routes in the routes that you do ask him to run, working the outside stem, double moves, comebackers, dig routes, can absolutely run the full X wide receiver route tree on day one. And what he showed at Ohio State, especially in that final year, is what I have gone on the record saying are generational ball skills, both in terms of drop rate, where he didn't register a single drop in his final season at Ohio State, and contested catches, where this dude uses his catch radius. He has just magnets for hands, elevates high points, contorts for tough catches, and came down with 69% of his career contested catch targets. Simply put, when the ball was in his area, he has that my ball bitch mentality. And that is something that this Titans team just didn't have. And you can see how they justify spending the number 4 pick on him. They had a high level of drops last year and certainly didn't have a reliable big-bodied wide receiver, someone that can be a chemistry guy for Cam Ward, be a red zone threat, help move the chains on third down, where if things aren't working and we just got to keep a drive alive and we don't have answers, maybe we have a matchup where we can get Carnell Tate just running a back shoulder, Cam Ward can hit him on time, and we can get that conversion, just like we see so often with someone like T. Higgins, with Joe Burrow in Cincinnati. I would be pretty surprised if Carnell Tate has this colossal breakthrough as maybe even like a top 10 wide receiver and is this like elite difference maker of a receiver. And there might come a time when things hopefully go really well for Tennessee that you're sitting there saying, you know what, we could actually have an even better number one than Carnell Tate, kind of like the Bengals when you get the opportunity to put a Jamar Chase next to him. Or I think George Pickens getting to pair with like a CeeDee Lamb comes to mind in that sense. And that's not to say there aren't situations where if everybody else is good enough and provides the right complementary skill sets that you can't be happy with Carnell Tate as your number one wide receiver, but he's kind of in that mold of a T. Higgins. And it's going to be pretty hard, I think, for that to not be what he develops into. I just see such a high floor with the player. Obviously, he's a rookie coming in and he's got to prove it. He's got to show what he can do, like being more of the focal point of an offense, because he did play next to Jeremiah Smith. And that's not like something you take away from Carnell Tate. It's just there's a little bit more for him to prove in that sense, especially at the NFL level. But he is a really good starting point. And if things go well for the Titans, it's because Carnell Tate became that best version, maybe that T. Higgins, sooner rather than later, which is far from impossible. I would say it's closer to likely than not. And then you have Calvin Ridley as your number two now, who's had to be this team's number one. And he might not actually be their number two in terms of target share because we know how much Brian Daboll loves Wan'Dale Robinson. But in terms of being like your Z, your number two in that traditional sense, whereas your slot is typically discussed as your number three, just depends on your definition, I suppose. But yes, Calvin Ridley is the starting Z wide receiver here, and that's his natural role. Not having to be the X and the Z and the focal point of your offense and the sole player you're depending on for a young quarterback to work out. And I actually think settling into a role that is much more catered to his skill set could lead to a nice kind of phasing out of the end of his career and maybe another good year or two here in Tennessee in this role. Now, his health and where his body's at 31 years old now, missed a lot of time for injuries last year. You know, there's obvious questions there. And he was a cut candidate heading into the offseason. They decided to stand by him. And I'm really glad they did, because we talk about complementary skill sets. And like I said, Calvin Ridley has a good release package. Hopefully he still has some of that speed in there to stack corners on the outside. He's a good route runner. He's the ideal Z wide receiver. So if he can get back at least somewhat to his old self, he fills in really nicely. Now, he's a tough player to rank because he's so inconsistent. He missed so much time last year. He has really dealt with drops and is an abysmal contested catch player. But again, now when you're in a pinch and Cam Ward's under pressure and things aren't going great, those contested catch, like have to have it moments, are going to be going to Carnell Tate, not Calvin Ridley. I think that pressure taken off of him is going to be good. So I'm actually cautiously optimistic that Calvin Ridley is going to have a nice year. And what that means for me is, I don't know, 60 catches, 750 yards, and most importantly, just kind of a quiet year where you're probably going to have a few drops, but hopefully they don't come in big spots like they have with him, not just here in Tennessee, but going back to Jacksonville as well, when they were asking him to be Trevor Lawrence's number one wide receiver. He showed he couldn't do it there either. I think that when you filter through the chaos of what has been his last 3 years, that's a pretty reasonable projection for him. It's not like, he got hurt last year, but it's not like he's been this injury-prone player. You might think of him like that because he got suspended for over a year for gambling, but it wasn't an injury thing. And even if he was such a non-factor last year, he did have over 1,000 yards in both 2023 and 2024, despite being more of a frustrating wide receiver when teams asked him to be the number one. So I think it's quite fun and underrated in a sense that they were able to retain him and make that work. And when you really look at this group now, like I said, he makes a lot of sense. So we'll see how things go for him. He is a wild card in his own right. And then you got Wan'Dale Robinson, who I hinted at a minute ago. Quite overpaid in my opinion here. I don't think he's a $20 million a year wide receiver. And there's a world that between Wan'Dale, what they gave Cordell Flott, and Alontae Taylor, that if things go well for this team, they regret not leaving a little bit more cap space for some better moves in the future. But when you're in a position like the Titans are, and you're looking to raise the floor and kind of stick with that term of like getting some adults in the room and know what you're getting, I can see how you talk yourself into Wan'Dale Robinson, especially when you talk about complementary skill sets and how he plugs in. You got your X in Carnell Tate, you got your Z in Calvin Ridley, and then you have your slot and gadget player in Wan'Dale Robinson. And that's exactly what Wan'Dale is. I don't feel the urge to spend a lot of time on him. He's a snappy route runner from the slot. He's decent after the catch, probably not quite as good after the catch as Brian Daboll thinks he is, if I'm being honest, but he's decent. He did show an ability last year with Jackson Dart that he hasn't necessarily shown to actually get down the field from the slot, which I think was a necessary layer to be unlocked if I'm going to justify giving him $20 million to be a slot wide receiver, because before last year, it was like he's literally just getting some of the most meaningless receptions of any receiver in the league, at least stretching the field and showing that you can be used in more ways than just sitting down and underneath zones and bubble screens. Like, that's necessary. I hope he can repeat that. But sure, you plug him in as a very good starting slot wide receiver. You know what you're getting there. And that's really all I have to say about Wan'Dale Robinson. And then you can go through some of this wide receiver depth, and you have some fun players. I mean, Alec Iomanner almost certainly would have been called upon to be a starter if they did release Calvin Ridley. And honestly, I think that would have been okay if they did. He's a player I really like, but I do struggle with a little bit. And I struggled with a little bit in his rookie season because he had some really good games, showed that, you know, he's a big, strong wide receiver. He can make some tough catches. He's a good route runner and moves pretty well for, a full-sized, 6'1", 210 pounds roughly. He's a player that I struggle with. Someone I really liked as a prospect. I thought he was a steal in the draft. And I thought there were moments in his rookie season where he looked like he was a steal. Looked like their number one wide receiver in certain games. But yeah, just a guy that kind of missing a little something, whether it's consistency or dynamism. I don't know, kind of a harder player to peg at times. He had on and off drops at Stanford, and that was certainly a recurring issue in his rookie season. And I definitely think he has a hard time accessing his top speed for some reason. There's moments where, especially at Stanford, even after the catch, especially, you see a really good athlete in there. But I don't know, kind of a hard player to always assess, because it's I'm always left wanting a little bit more from him. But I always compared him to his college predecessor in Michael Wilson, and we saw what eventually happened with Michael Wilson. I think, having to kind of earn his targets and eventually maybe still could replace Calvin Ridley, whether it's this year or in time. I'm certainly not writing off Alec Iomanner to be a quality player for the Titans. And in terms of depth, that's a really good piece to have. And then Chimere DK was really fun in his rookie season. I think he was the only all-pro rookie last year because of his special teams ability. Was a kick-ass returner, both doing kicks and punts for them. But he showed his flashes as a receiver. He actually ended up with 423 receiving yards, and I think showed everything that made him an exciting prospect. I liked that pick as well. He also went at the top of the 4th round, I believe it was. He's got field stretching speed. He doesn't really have drop issues. I wouldn't describe him as necessarily having great ball skills, but when he's open, he can track it and isn't going to put the ball on the turf, if that makes sense. But he's definitely a chess piece for this team, if nothing else. And there's going to be times where Brian Daboll wants to take some of those designed vertical shots. And depending how much long speed Calvin Ridley still has in there at 31 years old, Chimere DK very much might be that guy. Someone that I still think has different layers of his game to be unlocked. I don't think the book is written on his route running or ability to win tough catches. Honestly, he reminds me a lot of a young Alec Pierce, someone that obviously took some time to really get there and had to work his way through some crowded wide receiver rooms. Ultimately, I think in terms of having an exciting pair of a wide receiver 4 and wide receiver 5, hard to beat Alec Iomanner and Shamari DK. You have some further names here as well that will be competing for a 6th wide receiver spot. Mason Kinsey has been around. Bryce Oliver has been around. Xavier Restrepo was Cam Ward's go-to slot option in college. Caught the ball when he got on the field last year. I'm not quite ready to give up on Xavier Restrepo. KJ Osborne, more of that veteran presence in there, scrapping to prolong his career. Doesn't really matter, I think, ultimately, who your 6th wide receiver is. But it's, while it's not on paper this, like, absurd, talented, blow you away group of wide receivers, it's a hell of a lot better than what they had to work with last year. And then you have your tight ends, which is not a bad room. I mean, Gunnar Helm is another fun young player here that has upside in his own right. Not the biggest guy, not the fastest guy, not the strongest guy, but really, I think showed in his rookie season exactly what made him a good prospect coming out of Texas. He's a football player. He's not a bad blocker, even if he's not a physically imposing guy. He plays at about 6'4", 245, which is slightly below average size for a wide tight end. Certainly not the fastest guy, not the most dynamic mismatch problem or hardest player to deal with after the catch, but reliable hands, just definition of a good football player, man. I think if you look at like the Dalton Schultz's and Blake Ferguson's, that type of mold of just good tight ends, even if they're not going to wow you with their physical traits, that's a pretty reasonable projection for Gunnar Helm. And it's pretty easy to see how he pairs into the picture and can be a nice floor-raising piece for your tight end room. And then I love signing Daniel Bellinger. This was a little bit of an off-season win of mine, was saying don't be surprised when Daniel Bellinger gets a 3-year, $20 million contract because he blocks his ass off and he's not unusable as a receiving piece. If you want to get into 12 personnel, which they're inevitably going to do at times, Daniel Bellinger is a great bonus piece for heavy packages. You could even get someone like Kylan Granson into the mix there, which is I understand why they wanted a piece like that. When you look at this tight end room, you've got your balanced Gunnar Helm, you've got your blocking oriented Daniel Bellinger, and then Kylan Granson is a true like speed merchant of a tight end. But you might want some of those heavier package play action shot types of looks, and maybe we get a Kylan Granson game or two. And then Jaren Kanak also comes into that mix as your kind of like utility backfield player. Actually switched from linebacker to tight end at Oklahoma, and, wasn't a difference maker or anything, but for a guy that was new to that role, he didn't drop the ball. He wasn't useless as a blocker. I think he's particularly fascinating as far as 7th round utility fullbacks go. Wouldn't be stunned if he turns into a nice little chess piece for Brian Dable to move around. Ultimately, you have every skill set you could want, and you put that in the hands of a good schemer, that's kind of ideal. And I think, there's more to work with here than Brian Dable has probably had with the Giants. Maybe the 1 year with a healthy Malik Neighbors, you would take that over this group, but I don't think those Giants had the depth and just diversity of skill sets that they have here in Tennessee. So it does give them a decent floor, like we said, in terms of this is a practical group. But if you hit some green lights here with Tate and Ridley and Helm and some of the depth pieces, this could be a really fun group. It really could. But let's take a look at the last part of this offense, the offensive line. And they actually were not good last year. I think they got worse as we'll look at the offseason changes here. But I will just say out the gate, unfortunately, I'm a little worried about this offensive line. I would say if things go wrong for the Titans, and I would say yes, finishing as the 26th best team in the league would be considered things going wrong for the Titans. You're hoping things go well and they finish better than this, as you are with all these preseason rankings. It would be this offensive line that would be the source, I think, of what went wrong, in my opinion, because it was already not a good offensive line to begin with. And you look at their offseason changes, They lose some pieces, most notably Kevin Zeitler, not expected to be back with this team at this point. Lloyd Cushenberry, wasn't a great signing for them, but he was still a starting center. Oli Udoh, whatever. So not like the craziest of losses, but Zeitler especially was still pretty good at his old age. You would think, though, you can still get better if those are your losses, but they just didn't get any good additions this offseason. I mean, Austin Schlottman is the biggest of them. Never really been a full-time starter as a center, though he's following Carmen Brasillo over from the Giants. And, of course, we mentioned that with the coaching, like, getting Carmen Brasillo to coach this group is the biggest upgrade that their offensive line made, and that would be how things might go right here, is just good old line coaching. But yeah, Schlottman's really the only relevant addition. Beyond that, like, Cordell Volson was horrible for the Bengals. He might be starting, as we'll see in a second. And then a pair of day 3 picks in Fernando Carmona and Pat Coogan. So I certainly say downgraded on paper with the offensive line, and taking a look at their offseason, that's definitely an area where, if I'm a Titans fan, I do wish we could have found a way to do a little bit more here. But let's break this group down. I would say not all hope is entirely lost, but there's not a ton of hope. But let's break this group down. So they do come in as my 30th ranked offensive line. From a pass blocking standpoint, I would say not all hope is entirely lost, but they rank 23rd to 28th there. They do come in ranked dead last for run blocking. Unfortunately, that is how the cards fell for these rankings here. But yeah, I mean, it's honestly probably going to be a little bit of a quicker conversation here with this offensive line. You got Dan Moore at left tackle. Talk about quick conversations. He is probably just the most generic Band-Aid starter of a tackle you could imagine. He has played a bazillion snaps after Pittsburgh was wondering why they had him as a starter for so long, and was just always like towards the bottom of the league among all starting tackles in terms of run block tape, pass blocking efficiency, pressures allowed, all of it. Just like, yeah, he's technically one of the 64 best tackles in the league. And that's the nicest thing you can say about Dan Moore. And the Titans overpaid to an egregious extent just to get that level of tackle play in the building. To say something nice about it, like, offensive line is a weak link position. You don't want to have an egregious weak link like they've had in years past. They are in a better place at left tackle than they were in 2024. They're just paying way too much for what they're getting. And you're still going to have some issues with Dan Moore. He will lose in pass protection. He's not this great run blocker, but he is what he is. Then you got Peter Skoronski at left guard. He's the best of what they have, and honestly one of the more underrated players in the entire NFL. I can raise the tone and talk in a very positive light about Peter Skoronski. This has been a great draft pick. He's settled in really nicely at guard. It's pretty rare that you see him getting beat in pass protection. Ironically, when I was collecting footage for John Franklin Myers, he got bull rushed there. He is awesome and deserves his praise. And I think from a run blocking perspective, he's become much more comfortable there. The thing with Peter Skoronski is he's not the biggest guy. He's not the most athletic guy. He's not the strongest guy. And that is going to lower his floor in terms of what he's physically capable of in the run game, but he can block every scheme. He's got sticky hands. He knows what he's doing really well at this point. You know, earlier in his career, you saw some of those more assignment gaff types of losses in the run game. You don't see those nearly as much. And you're left with a really great guard. Frankly, I would say someone that needs more love as sort of a Pro Bowl caliber player. And he's the best of what they have here. So I don't have any negative notes on Peter Skoronski. At least you have that. But then you get back into question mark territory with Austin Schlottman. Now, look, I'm like cautiously optimistic that Schlottman's going to be just fine here. Because in a backup role, he's stepped in multiple spots, whether it's Minnesota or with the Giants last year, and that's exactly what he's been. He's been just fine. You haven't had to really think about him too much when he's had to plug in. And that's okay as a center. He hasn't proven himself to be a starter and that he can hold up throughout the course of a season, dealing with some of the game's elites on a consistent basis. He's like 31, maybe even 32 years old, more of a career backup type, but Carmen Brasillo obviously likes him. I think he got a 2-year, $7 million contract here. they're hoping he can kind of be a Dan Moore-esque center for them. I would say there's reason to believe he can be at least that, even if, again, he has never proven himself as a full-time starter for anybody. But with his career trajectory, in his own kind of weird Schlottman-esque way, I actually put the up arrow on Schlottman to show a little bit of optimism there that this could actually work out, at least relatively speaking. Again, someone that will still take his losses and you're going to need an upgrade long term, but maybe that you don't have to worry about Schlottman too much. Now, at right guard, this is what really drags this thing down. And like I said, it's a weak link position, and Cordell Volson has proven in his career to be nothing other than a weak link. You are banking on severe development really out of nowhere if Cordell Volson is going to be able to get through the season before you want to bench him. And if Carmen Brasillo is able to make this work, that is just going to be another feather in his cap in terms of him being one of the most underrated O-line coaches in the league. And again, Brasillo is the biggest reason you could have any hope for this offensive line. But what I see in Volson is a severely uncoordinated athlete, just struggles to tie his feet with his hands. It leads to extremely clunky and honestly unathletic looking pass blocking snaps. It makes him entirely inconsistent in the run game, falling off blocks. He gets after it. He has some good blocks, especially as a run blocker. But how they're going to be able to create any sort of like relatively consistent version of Cordell Volson is beyond me. But that gets especially concerning, just to stick with this right guard spot for now. When you look at their plan B options, I mean, really your next option is going to be Jackson Slater, 5th round pick out of Sacramento State from last year's draft, who played 34 snaps last year, and they came week 18 against Jacksonville, held his own for whatever it's worth, gave up 1 pressure on 22 pass blocking snaps, but just an entire unknown. Not someone I was able to get to his tape from Sacramento State, and obviously not someone that has any sort of relevant sample size against NFL competition either. So he was a physically talented prospect, and maybe he surprises. But that's really like your miracle dart throw, other than Cordell Volson, to have capable guard play. Because, look, Fernando Carmona, I did watch his tape at Arkansas, and he's not a horrible run blocker. He's one of these kind of try-hard, unathletic guards that is kind of top-heavy, leans into guys, and I think projects as a career guard. It'd be a pretty big surprise if he's surprised as a starting caliber guy. Pat Coogan's a center prospect, and he can really just bang out the rest of the depth here. I mean, you have Trey Hill there, has bounced around at this point, talented center guard prospect coming out of Georgia that hasn't amounted to anything in the NFL level. Your tackle depth isn't good. You have Austin Deculus, who's been a disaster pass protector as a tackle. Brandon Cranshaw Dixon, classic like developmental length-based undrafted type in year 2 here. Ryan Hayes was a decent run blocker at Michigan, horrible pass blocker. Emil Wagner, really bad tape, but an athlete that, for whatever it's worth, I thought should have been drafted as a draft and stash player, but not someone you want on the field year 1. This is probably the worst O-line depth we've seen in this series and might see. And you don't have a starting caliber right guard right now. Like I said, not ideal. If things go wrong for this team, the O-line being bad again is going to be your primary concern there. Now, you have J.C. Latham at right tackle, who we haven't talked about yet. Feeling pretty solid about where J.C. Latham's at. I've been wrong with my big take on J.C. Latham that I thought he was going to be a bust. I can hold my hand up and say he's been better than that, certainly. He's been a very playable, developing young tackle. Not someone to be like head over heels excited about either. I think he's had some pretty ugly moments. You've seen certainly some really bad games that at least show off some of the concerns I had that made me think he was going to be a bust. Like he's had some games where he's been a straight up liability, but they've been pretty few and far between. For the most part, he's been a very adequate pass blocker. And I think here in year 2, he turned things on as a run blocker, going over to the right side, was probably their best run blocker last year. Still not grading him as a better run blocker than Skoronski at this point because Latham's rookie year was pretty bad. So I think he still has room to grow and prove things out as a run blocker. But overall, it's like, okay, he was a little bit steep for as a draft pick, like a top, what was he, the 6th overall pick, 7th overall pick? A little bit steep for what he is, but he hasn't had the, concerns with his foot speed that could make him like unplayable. Like he's largely been okay, but you do see those moments where he struggles to stay square. The feet can still be heavy and he can take those losses. But overall, he's not really what you're worried about at this point. I think he will continue to get incrementally better as well. And you'll end up with a very solid, capable right tackle. Like I said, it's other aspects of this offensive line that are the primary concerns at this point, not J.C. Latham. And there's your offensive line. So that's how you end up with the 30th best offensive line in the league. There's some hope, I think. Peter Skoronski, Austin Schlottman, J.C. Latham, we still maybe haven't seen the best version of those players. Dan Moore is what he is. If Carmen Brasillo can pull a right guard out of a hat here and make this thing work, and maybe like Cole Van Lanen's on the line or something like that, which would be great to see this offense add another option at guard. Not saying it would like change their power rankings or anything, but would make me feel better about the direction things are going here for this year and beyond. But as is right now, I think you get the point. I've got my worries with this group, and it's a significant contributor towards the Titans' power ranking at 26 there. But let's tie this offense all together. Like I've said, a lot of work to do, a lot of unproven commodities and things that need to come together and hit green lights. And they come in as my 29th ranked offense as we head into the season. Obviously, that would suck if the Titans finish the year and they're the 29th best offense in the league. You are hoping, most importantly, Cam Ward ascends. These receivers ascend, that Brian Dable elevates, all of it. And there's very good reason to believe that can happen. But in this series, we are ranking teams based on proven commodities, which the Titans offense is not. They come in 27th for passing game, 29th for run game, and hopefully that's as bad as it gets for the foreseeable future. But let's flip over to the other side of things and see what sort of optimism we have for Robert Saleh getting to work with this defense. So we'll take a look at their offseason changes with the defensive line first and foremost. And we're seeing a lot of shakeup with this Titans defensive line. It's not an entirely new group, but largely it is. So you look at the interior of the defensive line, they made a big trade, and honestly not my favorite trade. We talked about it in the Jets deep dive. I think the Jets got surplus value in that trade, with the Titans moving on from T'Vondre Sweat, maybe not the best scheme fit for Robert Saleh as more of a true nose tackle, but you'll see there in the edge group, they get Jermaine Johnson in exchange. We'll talk about Jermaine Johnson. As I've said, prefer the T'Vondre Sweat side of that trade just from a strictly value perspective, but it's not like Jermaine Johnson's a nothing burger in return. Also, Sebastian Joseph Day, who's had some good snaps here in Tennessee. He moves on. James Lynch as well. Not as notable there, but additions, certainly. They land John Franklin Myers in free agency, reunited with Robert Saleh here. Big contract for JFM. That's a big addition. Also some veteran pieces, Solomon Thomas, Jordan Elliott to join the rotation, and they spent a 6th round pick on Jackie Marshall out of Baylor. Ultimately, I said neutral / very different for interior D-line. Trying to compare T'Vondre Sweat to John Franklin Myers is very hard to do, considering Sweat's a true nose tackle and JFM will even play some edge snaps for this team. So I just left that as neutral / different. At edge, it is upgraded. Even if I don't love the Jermaine Johnson trade, you bring him in. They also draft Keldrick Falk in the first round. He's also going to likely do a little bit of that JFM flex hybrid interior D-line stuff. I'm projecting JFM playing more interior, Falk playing more edge in year one. So that's why they landed in those positional categories. But certainly both are hybrid flex defensive lineman. Femi Oladeo, their second round pick last year, comes back from injury, only played 23% of snaps last year, so he was eligible to be listed as an upgrade for me. And then got to shout out Jacob Martin as well, who we'll talk about. They added a bunch of pieces to this edge group. Their losses are Arden Key, who's been a pretty solid player for this team, but nothing you can't live without Arden Key. Draymond Jones was traded away, but did play 38% of their snaps last year. And then Jihad Ward as well had to play a lot for this team last year. But I did say upgraded at edge. And with the interior D-line staying kind of neutral-ish, I guess, you can say that this D-line is better than it was last year. And there's a lot of different moving pieces to kind of discuss here. So let's get into it. It's a nicely ranked unit for me. They come in as the 13th to 15th ranked overall defensive line. Pretty good for pass rush, 14th to 18th. And then actually top 10 for D-line run defense, ranking 6th to 9th there. And this all centers around Jeffrey Simmons, who last season, while everybody was busy not watching the Tennessee Titans, Jeffrey Simmons actually here in year 6? Year 7, actually. Kind of like super quietly took another step. He took that step that I feel like for the last 4 years of deep dives, I've been saying on Jeffrey Simmons, like, can he go from great player to superstar, like all pro alpha type of guy? He just hasn't always been straight up like consistent enough to be viewed in that light. He did that last season. And honestly, in this series, I put the crown icon on the players who are the best at their position group. I debated whether or not we need to put that on Jeffrey Simmons. I think it's a little bit unclear because like Dexter Lawrence and Chris Jones kind of had down years last year. So it's, I would say that crown for who the best interior D lineman is, I probably won't have one in this series. I'll probably be a little non-committal on that. But we're in kind of a point in time to try to decide who is the best interior D lineman. But I would say last season, Jeffrey Simmons was a dominant pass rusher, ended up with 64 pressures, double-digit sacks. That was good for the 4th most pressures, the 2nd best pressure rate in the league, and he was number 1 in pass rush win rate last season. So he was truly dominant as a pass rusher at a level we haven't seen yet. I mean, and he's got the full package. Like, you could easily break it down for him. Power, get off, quickness. He has rush moves. He's got the rip move, the push pull. Like he's teach tape for what you're looking for in a true building block alpha Batman number 1 D lineman and certainly interior D lineman. And he's a great run defender. This dude he's a team captain. He brings the energy on a defense that desperately needed someone to do it. Yeah, he is a core reason why the Titans get the respect of a top half D-line in the league, especially when the rest of this group carries a lot of question marks. Now, it's not all question marks because next to him now, instead of Sebastian Joseph Day and Tavondre Sweat, who are more run defense minded guys, you now have John Franklin Myers coming in on a $21 million a year contract to do exactly what he's done in Denver, what he did for Robert Saleh with the Jets, and get after the quarterback, whether it's from the edge or from the interior, but largely on passing downs, it will be as that 3 technique causing havoc in between offensive lines. And look, man, I think we look back on this, and I'm not saying Denver can't go all the way for other reasons and whatever. We will still do their whole deep dive and everything, but I think they are going to regret letting John Franklin Myers. I think there were plenty of moments that he was actually their most impactful defensive lineman. And I know that's crazy to say because I know Nick Benito's awesome. But there were certainly games where John Franklin Myers was that dude for Denver. And certainly with Robert Saleh, with the Jets, I don't know how much of a say he had in the Jets just like giving him to Denver as a salary dump. I'm imagining Robert Saleh had something to do with that. I think Robert Saleh knows how big of a mistake that was. And this was obviously a priority to reunite with John Franklin Myers. And we know what he can do in this system. So he's going to eat as a pass rusher next to Jeffrey Simmons. That's fantastic. I Don't have a bad word to say about that. It's going to be one of the more disruptive, impactful interior rushing duos in the entire league, if not the best. Now, you still end up, I would say, good, not great as a pass rushing team, because this is going to be one of the more questionable edge groups in the league, especially when you're talking about John Franklin Myers on pass rushing downs, if not full-time, playing interior defensive line. And if he is playing the edge, as we'll see, it's not like you have some great interior D-line depth that'll step in his place if JFM is on the edge. So let's talk about the edge room. You bring in Jermaine Johnson in that trade for Devondre Sweat, and I do think this is a player that just hasn't been the same since he tore his Achilles, which is not crazy to say. He's a player that has always largely won being dependent on that first step explosiveness and the ability to convert speed to power. And it's still in there, but it's not what it once was in terms of ability to dominate opponents. And you're just left with an okay player. I don't think Jermaine Johnson just sucks now post Achilles, but I would describe him as kind of like Kwity Paye-esque, maybe even like Kingsley Enagbare, who honestly replaced him on the Jets, like someone that ideally should probably be your third edge. Pretty good run defender, still has decent power, has lightish feet for a bigger guy. He can occasionally hit you with some swipes or a cross chop, but largely not going to be a dominant, honestly, like true starting caliber edge player, unless he, now another year removed from the Achilles, really gets back into that shape, in which case I do think before the Achilles, he was on his way towards being a really nice starting defensive lineman. Maybe not an alpha or a takeover games type of guy, but certainly better than I currently have him rated. Now, is he still an upgrade over what the Titans have historically had at edge? Kinda. I mean, him and Arden Key, I would describe both as like ideally would be number threes, and they've both in this situation kind of had to be this team's number one edge. So at least it's familiar territory for the Titans, but I would be a little bit surprised if Jermaine Johnson fully responds. I'm not going to rule it out entirely. This is a big year for him to prove that he can get back and that the Titans knew what they were doing in this trade, but it just hasn't really been there on the tape with him, and that's why the Jets were willing to part ways with him. So he does get that yellow arrow saying that he could have a bounce back big year. It's also saying there's actually a world where he doesn't play up to this 76 rating, because I don't think that's quite what he's been post Achilles. A tough player to rank, but ultimately likely will just land as an adequate piece off the edge for this team. And then enter Keldrick Falk, their first round pick this year. I guess we got to have the Keldrick Falk conversation once again. It felt like we were doing this every week during draft season, but I wasn't the biggest fan of Keldrick Falk's upside as a player. A lot of talk about him as, a first round player, and look how, big and long he is, and think of what he could be someday. And it feels like we've done this so many times with Keldrick Falk as players that just never turn into the dynamic pass rushers that you're hoping he will be. And honestly, Keldrick Falk, I always disagreed that he has this crazy upside as a pass rusher, especially as an edge player. And that was another reason I continued to sour on him, because he lost weight in the pre-draft process as opposed to gaining weight. I don't see someone that is explosive or twitchy or bendy enough to win out on the arc on an island as an edge rusher and win in the ways that edge rushers typically do. I did see a guy that goes power to speed really well, that can shock you and go and has decently light feet, that if you were to kind of go the John Franklin Myers route and bulk up and play around 290 pounds, I actually could get more excited. And there's still time for that. Keldrick Falk is still very young. He's not as young as we initially thought. We thought he was 20 years old. And came out, I don't know if it was his mom or someone corrected the media and was like, no, he's actually 21 already. So he's not the youngest player in the draft anymore, but still very young. Maybe the Titans do go that route and have him bulk up and eventually be the JFM role. And to be honest, role-wise, I do think that's the plan, but I am curious where they go with the weight side of things, because I think that's another important part of this conversation. If you're going to dominate rushing from the inside, I think he should be doing that at about 290 pounds, not 270, 275. And he played at about 285 in college. So I am curious to see where that lands. And look, I do put the up arrow on Keldrick Falk, and I do see the path for him to be the eventual John Franklin Myers replacement. But how good is he now? And what does his role look like here in 2026? You know, I'm pretty cautious to say he's going to be a big impact this season. I do think as a run defender off the edge, he will do his thing. I have no questions that he can do that his traits will translate, especially as a 5 technique, and his ability as a run defender plays a role with Jeffrey Simmons and some other guys that are pretty good against the run. And JFM, by the way, will do this too and play some earlier down 5 technique and just have 2 guys just setting a great edge for this team. That's how you end up top 9 in D-line run defense grade for these Titans. But having someone else from the perimeter to complement this interior rush duo, I don't think Keldrick Falk's going to bring you, frankly, anything in 2026. In fact, his long-term projection for me is to eventually overtake John Franklin Myers in that role. But right now, with Jeffrey Simmons there and JFM, it's going to be harder to get him those snaps. So his role will be fluid. Again, I'm interested to monitor what they want his weight to be in time. And I am still lightly open to the idea that, hey, maybe they actually want him to play at 270 and maybe dropping those 15 pounds allows him to rush the passer a little bit better off the edge than he certainly did in college where he was a non-factor. But the thing is, it's not just the athleticism. He has no pass rushing skill set. He doesn't stem moves together. He doesn't have that. There's just so far to go for him as an edge pass rusher that it's hard to project too much from him in the passing game in 2026. Would love to be wrong about that. I think he's going to be probably more one of these edge rushers that is more of a 2 or 3 year developmental program. And in a best case scenario, by then he's sort of your JFM replacement, kind of that Eric Armstead type of guy. But again, they got to put some freaking weight on this dude. I don't understand why that was the thought process with this player pre-draft. And I'm just very fascinated to see where things go in that conversation. You do have some more edge players, though. You have Femi Oladejo, who I liked as a kind of day 2-ish, ideally like a rotational, just spark plug off the bench. This dude plays with so much energy. He's athletic. He's strong. A little bit more raw in terms of pass rushing, know-how. He played more linebacker at UCLA, flipped to edge in the final year. And maybe, he takes leaps and bounds with the pass rushing skill set. And I'm expecting growth there, certainly. I think as a run defender, he's got a really good baseline. I think, for where they drafted him, for what he was as a prospect and kind of how you're looking at this thing, long term, you're probably yeah, he's going to be a really nice third edge that will play a lot of snaps. And in time, as JFM and Falk kind of rotate between interior and edge, Femi will find his snaps and get in the mix. Will he be this, take over games like superstar or, even like this quality starter? That's a little rich at this point, but I certainly anticipate he gets in the mix and plays a role, eating up good snaps as kind of an innings eater off the edge. Jacob Martin, honestly, wouldn't be the least bit surprised if he is this team's best pass rushing edge rusher this season. I think this was one of the more sneaky signings and necessary signings, given what we've said about Jermaine Johnson's questions, Keldrick Falk's questions, Oladejo maybe not the highest upside. Look, Jacob Martin is what he is, but what that is a very solid designated pass rush specialist. And losing Arden Key, who brought some more of that juice off the edge, I think Jacob Martin can replace most of that immediately. So he's super underrated, was underrated for Washington last year, and has been underrated everywhere he's been. I don't want to sell him as some superstar or reason that this D-line is going to absolutely stun you, but I do think he's a floor raiser amidst an edge group that is surrounded by questions. And Titans fans, if there's games this year that you're watching and you're like, you know what? Jacob Martin's our best edge rusher, at least for actually rushing the quarterback. Well, you kind of heard it here first. So nice signing there. Jalen Harrell has been a nice 7th-round pick. He's been exactly what was advertised as, just kind of a go-getter, a quick-footed athlete of an edge that does a little bit of everything, but stalls out because he's just not the biggest guy. So there's your edge room. It's okay, but certainly doesn't stack up against what most teams are working with their edge rushers. And then you have your interior depth as well. You got a couple veterans that are kind of Robert Saleh familiar. Jordan Elliott was in San Francisco. I'm not a Jordan Elliott fan. I never have been. I would say he's up there in terms of head-scratching players that have just gotten so much more playing time and money than I ever would imagine a player of his caliber getting. Jordan Elliott has played almost 3,000 career snaps. He got a 2-year, decent, I think $6 million contract here to follow Robert Saleh over, despite being a complete and utter liability for the Niners, as he's been a complete and utter liability for 4 years in Cleveland before that. I don't get it. He has some athletic ability in a system like this to stand up and twist on a stunt and play into this scheme. I think there's a million defensive tackles that could do that actually offer some upside. He's here. Robert Saleh likes him. I don't really get it. And then you have Solomon Thomas, who do you think is probably a better player than Jordan Elliott at this stage. Look, total bust of a number 3 overall pick for the Niners once upon a time, but he has carved out a very long NFL career at this point, and doing it in systems just like this, where he's going to play on stunts and be that kind of undersized athletic D tackle. They draft Jackie Marshall out of Baylor. I actually wasn't familiar with him coming out, so we will see what his NFL prospects look like. You have some guys, Timmy Horn and Cam Horsley, maybe surprise from a run defense standpoint if they make this team, but very unproven in terms of NFL tape and production from those guys. So you're pretty thin on the interior at the end of the day. Overall, you've got some pretty major pros, right? Simmons and Myers is going to be a ton of fun, but the edge group and the depth of this D-line are entirely up in the air at this point in time, and that's where you land right about middle of the league. I think that actually makes a ton of sense. But with Robert Saleh calling the shots here, it's a pretty good starting point for this defensive conversation, and at least opens up a path for this to be a pretty good defense. Now let's go to linebacker. In terms of offseason changes, they don't lose anybody. They draft Anthony Hill in the 2nd round, and they bring in some depth in Mohamed Diabate. So I said slightly upgraded at linebacker. Certainly some more names to work with in this room than they've had in years past. I don't know that either of those guys are going to be starters this season, though. Right now, I am projecting Cedric Gray and Cody Barton to be their starters this year. Now, Titans fans will almost certainly come in and say, no, Anthony Hill is going to start. He's a 2nd-round pick. He's presumably getting some opportunities to rotate and show what he has to do. Eventually, Robert Saleh and this defense are going to have to make a decision on who's best for them at linebacker. I definitely think Hill should rotate in there and get a chance to show what he has to offer, but I'm not projecting he wins one of those jobs. We'll talk more about Hill, but I just don't think he's ready to beat out a Cedric Gray and a Cody Barton. Especially Cedric Gray, who I do think broke out last year. He was, I think, I called him a my guy and a sleeper of a pick when the Titans got him, and didn't get too much into the mix in year 1, played a little bit, but did end up winning the starting job last year, and very quietly was an excellent run defender for this team, and showed a lot of the things that got me excited with him coming out of North Carolina. I think he sees the game really well. He has adequate size. 6'1", 234 is very average, solid, standard starting linebacker size. He's not one of these tiny inside backers that can't get off blocks or hit hard as a tackler. But I think the diagnostics, the way he was able to make an impact and finish plays in the run game was really impressive in year 2 and should only get better here. I think there's actually a lot of Dre Greenlaw in there. If Robert Saleh is looking for some like-minded, like-bodied players, I see a lot of that. I think in coverage, it's still in flashes. He's still a young player that's learning how to break everything down in zone and how to flow with routes and take stuff away consistently. It's been in flashes. There's been a pass breakup here, a moment here or there. And he's actually kind of underwhelmed in terms of blitz rate production. But overall, I think the arrow is pointing up on Cedric Gray. I like the Dre Greenlaw upside comp for Cedric Gray. Maybe never going to be the most dominant top 10 linebacker in the world. And maybe will be best off as a number 2 long term. But really a nice player that sure could absolutely be your best linebacker and you not have to worry too much about it. So I like Cedric Gray. I think he's one of the unsung heroes, one of the underrated players on this Titans team. Now, a big reason you can justify drafting Anthony Hill is that Cody Barton much more is a what you see is what you get type of linebacker, at least on a macro scale. Cody Barton is someone I've had a hard time really narrowing down what he's good at over like a full evaluation of his time in the league. He's just been all over the map. Like some games, some seasons, it feels like he really struggles as a run defender. Tackling can show up as an issue. Other games, he's like playing with his hair on fire and getting everybody to the ground. There's years where he's getting abused in coverage and gets lost and gets picked on. And then there's games and years and times where he's loading up the box score with pass breakups and showing high-end moments with range and coverage skills. Ultimately, someone you look back on the year and you're like, yeah, he was all right. He had some good games. He had some bad games. Any given week, it is kind of hard to know what the final product is going to look like on Barton. That's probably an oversimplification of his game. You know, like he's been in the league for a long time. He's started a lot of games. He's a decent athlete. He's got good size. He's not a bad player overall, but you can see why the Titans are like, this isn't our forever LB2. This is a Band-Aid, but it's probably a Band-Aid that is more equipped for NFL action and a Robert Saleh defense than Anthony Hill. Because Anthony Hill, to me, just didn't do NFL linebacker things at Texas. He played a ton from the wing, and when he did play inside backer, it was so much a north and south, like play up field, attacking role that you just need more discipline and diagnostics in the NFL. And I just don't think he's going to be ready. That's just a lot to ask for such a young player that didn't show those things at Texas. Now, he can move in space. He had some good moments, some good like instinctive pass breakups out in space. He's not small. Like he has the theoretical play strength to develop into a better run blocker. I think his explosiveness into the middle of the offensive line and into a running back, like he can be a good blitzer. I just would be pretty surprised if he starts right away, unless it really is like trial by fire. We know what Cody Barton is. We're just making the conscious decision that we're going to go through some lumps with Anthony Hill until he gets there. And I could understand that thought process. But I feel like this team is going to come in and just try to, get their best starting lineup out there and see what happens this year, as opposed to taking the it's a lost season, let's develop young players approach, kind of like what Miami's doing. So we'll see who ends up starting next to Cedric Gray. I'd be very surprised if it's Barton and Hill, though maybe not technically impossible, just depending on how much Saleh likes Cedric Gray. But I think he's going to like him. I mean, Mohamed Diabate is a very reasonable fourth linebacker signing. I don't have a ton of notes on him, but he's played a decent amount in Cleveland at this point and hasn't been a complete and utter liability as far as backup linebackers are concerned. And then you got James Williams still here. I'm still technically fascinated, especially with Robert Saleh, who's done such a great job with linebackers and a lot of kind of these safety convert / really athletic space linebackers. Maybe you get something out of James Williams. Maybe not at this point. Him not winning a linebacker job last year was certainly a red flag, but he's had some decent-ish moments. So maybe there's something there, but certainly a good special teamer to have around in James Williams. But there's your linebacker room. It's not the worst place to be. They do rank 25th. One of these linebacker rooms that's not going to define the defense, I don't think, but probably not going to shipwreck them either. They come in 23rd to 25th for the linebacker run defense, 20th to 24th for linebacker coverage. It's an okay group that hopefully in time, Cedric Gray and Anthony Hill can be a really nice 1-2 punch. I like how those guys project for the long term. But again, Cedric Gray has a ways to go still, and Anthony Hill, we'll see how much of him we even see this year. And then we have this Titans secondary, which is a total wild card for me. First things first, we do need to talk about the offseason changes in the secondary, though. So you're saying goodbye to a bunch of names here that have played. Roger McCreary was traded towards the deadline last year. Darrell Baker Jr. has been a Band-Aid kind of replacement level starter for them. L'Jarius Sneed, of course, was a disaster signing gone wrong. He's going back to Kansas City here, but not much of a loss for the Titans. Jalen Armour-Davis has had to play here. It's a bunch of names, nothing you're really worried about. They make the big signings of Alontae Taylor and Cordell Flott. We'll continue to talk quite a bit about them here and those big contracts, but still good additions, even if quite expensive. And Joshua Williams as well, a sneaky little pickup for them as well, coming over from Kansas City. So I said upgraded at corner. Safety's much more neutral. A couple of veterans on the way out. Xavier Woods, Quandre Diggs weren't giving them too much at this stage. And they bring in Tony Adams as kind of equal level veteran depth. So I said neutral at safety. But let's get into it. And a unit I kind of went back and forth with because on paper, this is one of my lower ranking secondaries. They actually rank 30th to 31st for DB coverage. Much better for run support. This is a physical, scrappy group. They rank 7th to 16th for DB run defense. It did leave them overall as my 30th ranked secondary here. So it's a pretty bad starting point. But I could see a path where this absolutely exceeds that and ends up being a pretty decent unit. But it's a wild card unit for me because I actually kind of struggle to know what all each of these pieces are going to bring to the table. Starting with these two massive contract free agent signings here that look, I like Alontae Taylor, I like Cordell Flott, but they're like egregious overpays for what they've proven at the NFL level. I think they're wild cards in the sense of can they actually play up to the money that they gave him? Just because you slap $20 million on Alontae Taylor's name and $15 million on Cordell Flott's name doesn't make them a CB1 and a CB2 like those contracts dictate. Alontae Taylor's been a really fun player in New Orleans as a second or third corner that just kind of flies around and plays aggressive and hits people and tries to bait the quarterback. And, he is a very erratic, spontaneous, aggressive defensive back who's a ton of fun to watch. And I get why Robert Saleh likes him. And I love his run defense, but he's been very week to week in terms of having sticky coverage. And the other thing is he's by far been at his best, largely playing as a slot corner. He's done both. He's tall. He's big enough. It's not a traits thing. It's just his game has largely translated best as a slot corner. While here, they are almost certainly going to ask him to be an outside corner. So it's fascinating, man. Maybe Robert Saleh is able to find a version of Alontae Taylor that's a superstar and is his version of Charvarius Ward and he stuns us. We saw years of him in New Orleans pretty much being the same player. I'm really not expecting Alontae Taylor to be much different than what he's been. And I think that's a fun yet inconsistent member of your secondary that is not worth $20 million. If he was your fourth or fifth piece and he's just kind of in there trying to make plays and muddy stuff up and make stuff happen, I like that. I just don't like paying him $20 million to be your CB1. So I've got some questions about that. And then you got Cordell Flott, probably a little bit more steady as a football player based on what he did last year, where he slid outside. For a long time, he was known as Cordell Slot because he would actually play on the inside, despite being north of 6 feet tall, which typically Not always, but typically that suggests outside corner. And he played really well for a Giants secondary that didn't have a whole lot of positives. And him, it's more of a case of like, can he follow it up? Like the Giants didn't retain him. He's a skinny third-round pick that had a one-year breakout year at the most volatile position in the sport. And I did put the yellow arrow on him because he's still young. That contract indicates a very smart defensive staff sees more in him. But also the yellow arrow in the sense that it is a volatile position. He might not live up to that contract and prove to be maybe worse than, say, the 77 rating I have on him. So both him and Taylor, kind of in their own weird way, got the yellow arrow as like kind of tough players to rank. I kind of feel like I know what I'm getting with these guys for the most part. I feel like at the end of the day, you're probably getting a solid outside corner in Cordell Flott that's not unbeatable, and a very week-to-week cover player that's really physical and is going to give you some impactful plays in Alontae Taylor. And I kind of ended up just like going back and forth. I'm like, do I put the yellow arrow on these players, which indicates like, they're tough to rank, they could be better than this, they could be worse than this, or do I just kind of stick to my guns and say, no, this is who they are? I struggle with it, man, because that's a lot of money to give these players, and I think Robert Saleh knows what he's doing. I think it means something, but it's tough, man. I think these are okay players at the end of the day. And honestly, between the two of them, it's an okay starting point that probably alone wouldn't make you the 30th secondary in the league like we have this group, but you've got so many questions around this too that make the entire unit such a question mark. And that Marcus Harris is the next one. Marcus Harris might be the most unknown starter that we put up on the graphics for this entire series. Unless you watch the Titans or are like an absolute draft sicko, like beyond my own level, which is a lot of levels of sicko. I don't even know who Marcus Harris was when he got drafted. And I watched that California secondary twice because they had a bunch of guys coming out. Marcus Harris goes in the 6th round. I was like, oh, I didn't know they had another guy. I was like, okay, well, let's see if he does anything. And then he ends up cracking the starting lineup as a 6th round pick and had some really good games in the slot. Enough so that he's created a lot of intrigue here, that he can win this job and be the next kind of lowly drafted, 6th round, a lot of undrafted slot corners. It's a position group that you can find these guys late. And, he's a question mark in the sense of like, there's a lot of upside there. He's obviously like very unproven. I wouldn't say he was perfect in coverage, as essentially no rookie corners are, but the underlying metrics on him were really good. I mean, a 52% reception percentage allowed for a slot is damn good. And he was really solid as a tackler as well. He ended up playing 342 snaps last year, didn't miss a single tackle, and he was pretty steady as a tackler at California too. So like, all right, he's a 6th round pick, entered the starting lineup late in the season, showed some good stuff. What are we talking about here? What sort of player is Marcus Harris? He's a total unknown. A lot of encouragement though from what he showed last year. So we'll see where that goes with him, if he even is the starter, because they did bring in Joshua Williams as well, who's been kind of buried in Kansas City, admittedly, and he's kind of had this weird career to follow, like him and Jalen Watson, right? Kind of like the same players coming out in there of the same draft class, kind of rotating snaps. Some guys, one good game here, one bad game there, just kind of like a steady climb to like a solid level. Eventually, Jalen Watson really edged out Joshua Williams, but Williams still has played well when he's been out there for the Chiefs. So he's kind of a sneaky little pickup that, all right, if Marcus Harris maybe was a little bit more of a flash in the pan, and I'm not saying that he was, but let's say he was, and isn't really a fit here with the new scheme, the new system, the new coaching staff for some reason. Cordell Flott can play in the slot, and Alontae Taylor can play in the slot, and I think Alontae Taylor is best in the slot. So you might actually have a path to go Taylor back in the slot, Flott outside, Williams outside, Harris more as a dime back. You do have some depth in that sense. It was another sneaky good signing. kind of like we talked about with the Jacob Martin addition. Just to round out your cornerback depth, there's not a whole lot else to write home about there. Micah Robinson played a tiny bit for them last year, pretty unknown. Eric Hollett's played a little bit. Latrell McCutcheon was a very good undrafted pickup. I thought he would get drafted, just kind of your traits-based developmental corner prospect, ends up slipping through the cracks there. Not going to play much this year, but as a developmental special teamer, I thought was a good pickup, so keep an eye on him more like long-term. But that is your cornerback room. And then you have the safeties. And Amani Hooker, another player that I debated the yellow arrow on. I feel like it was probably just a down year on a really bad defense. Nothing to really panic about. He's only 28 years old. And the 6 years before last year, he's just been a very steady hand on the back end. But last year, for whatever reason, just really got picked on in coverage. He's not the fastest player on the back end. He's not the most fluid athlete. He showed some red flags as a coverage player that we've honestly really never seen from Amani Hooker. So again, I between Taylor, Flott, and Hooker, any of these guys you could argue should or shouldn't have this sort of yellow arrow mentality of what are you actually going to get from them? I ended up not putting it on Hooker because ultimately, I kind of trust what I think of the player. I think he's really smart. I know he's not a great athlete. He's a physical player, maybe not the most consistent tackler or dominant run defender, but I'm at this point not willing to say that he regressed last year, just that he had a bad year. But it's something to keep an eye on, certainly. And even at his best, he's not this incredible impact. He's kind of the definition of a safety. He's your sort of last line of defense and a decent player in the back end. And then you have another guy with supreme upside that's just entirely unproven, and that's Kevin Winston Jr. And he did eventually get on the field last year, mid-season, ended up playing 9 games. And unfortunately, brutal in coverage. In 9 games, he was targeted 21 times, gave up 19 receptions for 304 yards and 3 touchdowns allowed. Yeah, that's really, really bad. And it's not like coverage was his biggest selling point coming out. I think he projects as a higher upside cover player than that. And that's reflected still in a 69 rating that I give him for coverage. But he's got a long way to go before he makes an impact as a coverage defender, as a safety. However, he was everything as advertised as a run defender. Missed just 6% of his tackles, was all around the box, effective as a blitzer. Everything you saw from him at Penn State that I thought made him super underrated. Was a top 50 player for me ultimately on my draft guide, but he fell because he was coming off of an ACL injury in that final year at Penn State. So it's been a couple of years since we've gotten a fully healthy Kevin Winston. This should be the year. So I think he's absolutely a Robert Saleh type of guy. I think there's a lot of similarities to your Talanoa Hufanga and Malik Mustafa as a heavy hitter, a heavy hitting downhill safety. Loved this player. I think his sky is the limit. There's in terms of how well he moves and how long he is and how well he plays the run, he's obviously not Derwin James, but there's glimpses of Derwin James in there if you could get his best plays more consistently. So entirely unproven, right? But man, is the upside exciting. So I think you can really start to see where I kind of struggled with this secondary as we're ranking teams at their floors. There's a worst case scenario for this secondary where your safety's struggling coverage. Marcus Harris was a flash in the pan, isn't much as a 6th round pick. These 2 corners were dramatically overpaid, and they're just kind of jags, just a guys. And you end up with one of the worst secondaries in the league. There's a positive side of the coin here where Kevin Winston's freaking awesome. Amani Hooker goes back to his old self as a very solid player. Marcus Harris was a diamond in the rough in the slot. And the Titans kind of knew what they're doing and ended up getting some good, I don't want to say a bargain, but some bang for their buck out of those 2 big cornerback contracts. And maybe even Joshua Williams enters the mix. This unit is the definition of why I call these units wild cards and what makes this series so important to look at What could go right? What could go wrong? There's a lot going on with this secondary. You have some safety depth as well that I can skim through. Tony Adams is technically a floor raiser. If Kevin Winston's a disaster, he's played for Robert Saleh, and he's fine. Very useful NFL depth, but not someone I have a ton of notes on. Hasn't been a dominant player in either phase, but okay. You got more of a special teamer in Kendall Brooks. Jarek Reed has some speed and range, has really bounced around at this point after being drafted by Seattle. And Sanauzi Kane likes to hit, and that's the nicest thing I could say about him, but never projected well as a coverage player. But it's NFL safety depth, nothing really too exciting there. But yeah, there is your Titans secondary. Obviously, it's going to be critical to see how this unit pans out if we're talking about this defense at large, because the rest of it I feel pretty good about. Maybe not amazing about, but pretty good about. Love the coaching. The D-line is extremely workable, even if you have some questions with the upside of the edge group. Linebackers, fine. It's really that secondary. How do things land there? Because even with those questions in the secondary, I have the Titans coming out as the 17th overall defense. I think that's a good starting point here for what Robert Saleh can make of this group. They come in 20th for pass defense, 16th for run defense. So you can see probably the coverage questions of the secondary being the biggest difference maker there. But there's obvious upside with that secondary. If this is just the 18th best secondary in the league, which I don't think is impossible for the Titans, could the Titans have a top 10 defense this year coached by Robert Saleh? A phenomenal coach with a really solid defensive line up front and just kind of decent everywhere else? I don't think that's out of the realm of possibilities. Maybe an optimistic spin on it. But I do think overall, even if you have some questions with the secondary, the floor of this defense is still really nice. And that matters when you're talking about Cam Ward taking a step and taking pressure off of him. You had games last year where the Titans were just getting boat raced. You gave up 38 points to the Colts. They gave up 37 to the Niners, 34 to the Saints, 41 to the Jags the last game of the year. Like, keeping these games in punching range where you can keep to a normal game script and not force Cam Ward to enter these like dramatic, hero mode moments, that really matters. And I think this defense can at least be, what you're looking for there to keep games close, keep the offense fresh, all of that stuff. I'm really optimistic about how things can play out on this side of the ball. But let's take a look at the third phase for the Titans here and discuss the special teams real quick. In terms of offseason changes, they did upgrade at punter, going from the very old Johnny Hecker to Tommy Townsend, who's been excellent in Houston. So interdivision steal there of Tommy Townsend. As we look at the Titans special teams, they came out smack dab in the middle of the league. Very good, very respectable, 16th ranking there. And they're really set up well as far as the specialists are concerned. Joey Sly, 15th overall kicker, taking a look at his grades the last 2 years. Tommy Townsend, who we mentioned has been awesome in Houston. He actually grades out as the 5th best punter over the last 2 years. And Shamari DK, can he follow up an awesome season? I mean, returning can be volatile, but he was great. He made All-Pro for his contributions as a returner last year. But it's not just about the specialists. I also bake in the PFF and DVOA team grades for special teams from the previous season to take my best crack at predicting these special teams. And the Titans did not do well, according to PFF. 26 for special teams there. Much better for DVOA. They ranked 7th, but you can see how that brings them a little bit more towards the middle. And then I also consider the kind of benefit of the doubt overall team coach and culture slider, where the Titans have some more to prove there, where they were 25th to 27th for overall team coach and culture. But they should be in pretty good hands. And I would say, as far as anticipating teams to exceed their special teams rankings, if it is like the coach and culture aspect of things, like obviously Robert Saleh still has to come in and get things rolling on that front. But if that can really get brought together and your backup linebackers and safeties are flying around covering kicks better than maybe the Titans did last year, this should be honestly a pretty special teams. So I do like how that phase projects for Tennessee. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to play the interview, which was amazing, with James Foster and Easton Freeze. James is the co-host of our Browns guest. Him and Corey are busy doing like summer scouting, a lot of great review stuff for the upcoming NFL draft over on Daft on Draft, their podcast. He is also contributing over at Wide Left. And Easton Freeze does an incredible job covering the beat for the Titans over at A to Z Sports. You'll see those guys' handles and where to find their work. Definitely go check out their stuff. Obviously, if you're a Titans fan, yes, but just NFL fans in general. These guys do great work, and I was happy to bring them in. So let's roll the interview, and then when it's done, I'll come back, recap strengths and weaknesses for this team, get into the schedule, and some of my final predictions for Tennessee. And now I am very thrilled to welcome in the very first ever triple threat deep dive guest interview. We have Easton Freeze and James Foster here. James has been a typical guest, but Easton, we've been hitting it off the last few years down there at Shrine Bowl, Senior Bowl, and had to bring you on, man. You're so dialed into the Titans, James. We couldn't skip out on you either, so we are gonna make this work. I'm gonna shut my mouth because we're gonna try to keep this within 30 minutes, so this isn't a 4-hour deep dive here. But thank you guys for coming on. Let's just hop right into it. I'm gonna pass this first question to you, Easton, and then James, if you want to piggyback off anything he says, hop on in. I'm not going to stop you, but I wanted your initial reaction when Robert Saleh is announced as head coach. Just do you like it? You not like it? And then also, what have you kind of picked up on? What have you learned in his short tenure here with the Titans?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. I love listening to this series for all the teams every year, and so it's cool to be a part of it. My initial reaction was, I think everybody's reaction was painted by the fact that Robert Saleh meant not Matt Nagy. So there was, I think that was the very first thing was, okay, we knew it was those two guys after the weekend that was, and like a bunch of in the weeds local reporting stuff. We knew it was down to those two guys, and they make that announcement very late on like a Monday night. And he's the guy that I wasn't alone in this, but there were a handful of us that kind of circled him as a reasonable pivot all the way back when Brian Callahan was fired in October. Because we know how these teams work, the way that they kind of swing the pendulum the opposite direction in some way, whether it's from young to old or offensive to defensive or like nice guy to authoritarian. There's always some kind of pivot because they think that that's the issue and not that they have bad players. And I'm not surprised that Saleh was the pivot from Callahan from a defensive standpoint, from a culture standpoint. He's somebody that the veteran players on this team very clearly are invested in. They respect the pelts that he has on the wall. All of the defensive guys, it's not hard for them to be bought into what he does because even in the places where he's failed, his defenses have still been really, really good. And it's still really early, but it's been nice getting to know him at practice and stuff, talking to him yesterday at practice and kind of getting his feel for how he treats this time of year, what he thinks about when and how players should be practicing, all of the little quirks that coaches have, their tendencies. I think that he's going to be really good for the culture of the team. I just don't know if they're going to be any good at football.
Absolutely. All right, so we're gonna pass the next question off to James here. Kind of getting the scouting profile, if you will, on year one of Cam Ward is kind of where I want to get both your thoughts on Cam Ward, but we're gonna start with James here. On like what really stood out as a strength, what maybe stood out to you compared to what you thought about him in college as well, and what are the biggest things he needs to improve upon here in year two?
So I think the biggest pleasant surprise, or maybe that's too strong, like I guess positive development would be how comfortable he was working the middle of the field. And that was one of the reasons that I sort of increased my grade on him throughout the season. I think the last 3 or 4 games of the year, there was the Syracuse game, the Iowa State game where he only played a half, quit on his team in the bowl game. The end of the year, you really started to see him hit those backside digs with anticipation and just be a lot more comfortable attacking those zone windows. And so I ended up boosting my grade on him a little bit. Got to the league, and I felt like he had continued to build on that, and that was one of his defined strengths. So that's obviously not a guaranteed thing that it's going to translate like that. So that was a pleasant surprise. Obviously, the playmaking and creativity outside of the pocket, like there's nobody that didn't view that as a strength based on his college tape. Again, that's something though that doesn't always translate. He isn't this freak athlete, so sometimes it can be a little bit more difficult to escape pressure in the NFL. That rep against Cleveland, was it Grant Delpit? It's sticking out in my mind where he stiff arms him in the backfield and avoids a sack. But the escapability and the playmaking outside of the pocket was obviously there, but I feel like we all kind of expected that.
Yeah. So what's like the big thing you want to see him get better at?
Big thing is it's the same thing as what it was in college. It's accuracy, specifically deep accuracy. One of my favorite stats is Sports Info Solutions on target rate, which is like, did you throw it accurately? Did you hit the receiver in stride, regardless of whether or not they dropped it? Cam Ward was dead last in on target rate from 15 plus air yards. He was second to last behind only Caleb Williams in 0 to 10 air yard throws. So like, he's not going to be a franchise quarterback if he doesn't get more consistent ball placement. That's just a fact. Now I think, I look at the on target rates like all the time, and I consistently see rookie and young quarterbacks that rank at the bottom of that list, because when you've got, when you're drinking out of a fire hose, so to speak, and you're worried about learning the offense, adjusting to new receivers, new offensive line, the first thing that goes out the window is the mechanics, especially if it's something that you've just worked on that off season. So I do give him some.
Thank God he's not adjusting to any new things this year.
Exactly. I do give him some breathing room there, but I mean, it's the deep ball, especially, he's got to convert on those at a higher rate, because at least last year his receivers are not converting on them at a high rate. So you can't also have the quarterback, knocking down the accuracy.
Yeah, it's also a bummer Anthony Richardson wasn't starting last year, because that would have defaulted him to at least.
Where
not
are the other bad guys? Come on.
My next Cam Ward question, I want an answer from both you guys here, is a tough one. I'm putting you on the spot. What's your 1 to 10 confidence level that he's going to be a franchise quarterback by the end of 2027? And my standards there was a top 16 QB.
I'll go first.
Go first.
My confidence level, so by the end of 2 seasons from now, I'd say like a 7 or an 8. And I, I like your definition of franchise quarterback. I was actually talking to somebody yesterday about like, how do you define that? And mine is a little bit different technically, but I think in nature it's the same. It's the kind of guy who, when they're due more money, you go, well, of course you pay that guy more money. And so, we're talking about like the Baker Mayfields of the world are in that category too. It's not just the top 5, top 10 guys in the league. I think there's a path to him being one of those upper echelon quarterbacks. I don't know. My confidence level in that would be a lot lower than him simply being a franchise guy. I think he's got too much in terms of arm talent and processing ability to not be a starter in this league. I think the question is really just how good of one can he be?
Yeah, I was thinking like 5 or 6. It's hard to exactly set the scale, but I agree with a lot of what Easton said, and I think that even if he doesn't become like a sharpshooter, if he's kind of middling to below average in terms of ball placement, I think you can still be a volatile but good quarterback that's within that top 16 range. Like the what Easton said about the question about like whether or not you pay them, I think that's a great standard for a franchise quarterback. Or like if you're sitting in the top 5 and you've got like a Dante Moore type of prospect, like are you completely ignoring quarterback, or are you having second thoughts? I think that, aside from accuracy, I really do think that Cam Ward was pretty impressive last year. And like I on Hot Read, the Titans podcast, I was asked like what my updated grade would be for Cam Ward. And my revised grade would be a lot higher than it was heading into the season, based off of last year.
Very nice. All right, we're gonna pivot a little bit, although not necessarily, because this does still tie into Cam Ward. This one's passing it back to Easton here. I'm pretty stoked about Brian Dable, especially going back into an offensive coordinator role. Even with what he did at the Giants, obviously with the head coach duties, we don't need to get into it. I just had the Giants deep dive for my last episode, but I do still think he works great with quarterbacks. He actually was the one that wanted Jackson Dart, like the one good thing that happened for the Giants last year. So I'm pretty stoked about him getting to work with Cam Ward. I'm curious if you were as excited landing him, and then also kind of just being around there. What have you already kind of witnessed about his excitement level to get to be with Cam Ward? I know that he was interested in him, right, in that draft. Maybe you have some notes on that. But yeah, what's kind of the Dable Ward vibe right now?
Well, you're right. The Dable definitely liked Cam coming out, and it's impossible not to be pleased with that addition when he was a guy getting, head coaching interviews the immediate offseason after being fired from being a head coach. He's really in that solid mold right now of a guy who everyone seems to have him penciled in for a future head coaching job. I think Titans fans are not as optimistic as they should be about how long he's going to stick around, because I do think that he's going to have a really good offense in a hurry if he's only going to be here a year or two to get another head coaching job. And I'm just not sure the Titans are going to jump that fast. It'd be a great problem to have if all of a sudden you're a top 10 offense and then you lose the OC. Like that's the a privilege pressure that good teams have to deal with. There's two notes on him. One, I think that and I'm curious if you touched on this in your Giants deep dive or in the Titans deep dive, I definitely think his disposition is better suited for coordinating than head coaching. And my buddy Danny Heifetz at The Ringer, I was talking to him about this because he's a big Giants fan. And he has this great comparison where he thinks that Dan Campbell and Brian Dable are opposites. Everyone at the podium during the week thinks that Dan Campbell is this giant meathead crazy guy, but then in the game, he's level-headed and like an analytics-driven person that we don't see. And then Dable during the week is this like buttoned-up professional head coach at the podium, and then he loses his freaking mind when he gets on the sidelines, which is fine if you're a coordinator. It's not fine if you're the head coach. The one thing about early returns on his offense that I'll note, like the general theme I've gotten from OTA so far, and this is a big change for Cam where I'm very curious to see how it's going to work. A big tenet of the Brian Callahan regime's ask of him was, we are going to focus on taking what the defense gives us. And a big theme of what Dable is changing is he's saying, Cam, you're going to take what I give you. I'm going to tell you what's going to be open. Trust me, it's going to be open. Throw it there. Do this. And that's a very collegiate approach, which is interesting to be doing that in the NFL for a guy who you're hoping can like become a professional quarterback. But I definitely think it maximizes what Cam is good at. And I'm curious to see how in the immediate term that can work for him. And if maybe that's like, I don't know, for lack of a better term, the training wheels that propels him into a larger career.
Sure. Cool. And then let's pivot to some draft conversation here. They end up going with Carnell Tate here. And I actually wanted to kind of start this one with Easton and then let James jump in. Just kind of if you were surprised that they end up landing with Carnell Tate. I know there was a lot of Jeremiah Love noise there, but yeah, what was the initial reaction there?
Well, I'll stick to my capacity as a reporter and let James do all the analysis. I'm sure everybody was surprised. I think Carnell was surprised. So was I like super shocked based on how the board fell? No. And the Jeremiah Love going at 3 thing really changed the math in a hurry. Because at the time, Carnell on a lot of people's boards was the number 2 overall option and the number 1 offensive option, right? So if the whole point was we need to go get Cam Ward, a great help on the offense, then taking the top offensive player makes sense when you look at it in hindsight. But yeah, I think I was reporting pretty explicitly, and I was right on some of it and wrong on some of it, that if Jeremiah Love was there, they were going to take him as long as the top edge rusher on the board was already gone, which he was, David Bailey to the Jets at 2. I do think if Bailey was an option for them, they would have taken Bailey over Jeremiah Love. but that was never really an option. The wild card was obviously Arvell Reese, and that I think a lot of teams weren't really sure what was going to happen there. I was surprised that they took Tate over Reese, given the fact that those were the two options. But it makes sense, right? If your entire life rests on Cam Ward and his success, then adding help for him, I get it, man. And Carnell's been awesome so far at OTAs. He's been as advertised, so I'm excited for him to be here.
Great. Yeah, so go ahead, James. I want to hear like where did Tate land for you in terms of stacking the wide receivers, and just kind of what are your expectations here? There was also a lot of talk about like, well, he's really good, but can he actually be a good, and like, is his upside enough to be like an alpha, a true number one? Where do you kind of land on those two questions, I suppose?
Yeah, so I had Tate 7th overall, and I mean, one of my favorite things about doing summer scouting is that I get to see the year-to-year development for these guys. And I think Carnell Tate was probably, I went back and looked one time. He was one of the 2 or 3 biggest risers from my summer grades. Like watching him over summer scouting, it was the Stephen A. Smith meme with just like a blank stare. I was totally unimpressed. And the attention to detail as a route runner is the number one thing that he improved on. So much better against press as well. So as far as like him having the upside to be a wide receiver one, I feel like there are 3 maybe reasons that people say that, and I think one of them is valid, 2 are misguided. So first of all, which like I don't think this is like a common opinion, but the idea that because he played behind Jeremiah Smith, he's not a wide receiver one. Like I have not scouted a receiver. I haven't scouted a receiver that would have been a wide receiver one over Jeremiah Smith, but I don't think there's like a ton of people actually seriously saying that.
Right.
The speed thing seems to be the main reason that people are lower on his upside. I mean, just playing it by the numbers, if you tell me that a receiver has runs a 4.5 versus runs a 4.3, like the 4.5 guy has a better chance of being a Pro Bowler. But like even based on the tape, Carnell Tate creates such consistent vertical separation because he's so explosive. And I like watching him at Ohio State. You can tell like this guy's not that fast, but he gets open down the field because he has elite burst into his stems, does an outstanding job of setting up defensive backs, getting him to squat on an underneath route and then blowing past them. So the nuance as a route runner and the short area burst is to me what's going to allow him to stack man coverage in the NFL. And so, I think that continuing to improve as a technician, he's got, some of the most reliable, plucky hands that you'll ever see. So I think that he has the makings of a wide receiver one, just in terms of that skill set. The one hang up that I do have, and I think is a valid concern, is that he gives you nothing after the catch. There's no elusiveness. Like they would try to give him those slide routes, like get him out in the flat, and they just went nowhere. There's no contact balance. He does have, does transition from receiver to runner pretty fast, and he can split vice tackles and kind of pick up some extra yards after the catch. So I don't think it's necessarily like a hard cap. Like he can't get stronger, get better vision, better anticipation of pursuit angles. But that is something that I think would need to develop for him to be, I would say to elevate past like a fringe wide receiver one type of tier.
If I may.
Yeah, that was, go ahead.
The one thing I just want to emphasize, and it's the question that keeps rattling around my brain this offseason. It's the thing I'm most excited to see. Did we, as a community, do a good enough job asking the question, what happens when a guy happens to play with the maybe best receiver prospect the world's ever seen? Like what's it going to look like when he's not playing with Jeremiah Smith? I was talking to our buddy Nick Suss, who writes for the Tennessean here earlier this week, and he's like, I was covering those awesome LSU teams when I made the transition from college to NFL. And I think back to how Justin Jefferson was like the 4th receiver taken in his class, in part because he wasn't Jamar Chase. I'm not saying that Carnell Tate's going to be some secret stud, but if the Titans hit a home run on this guy, it's going to be in part because Mike Borgonzi was able to see past the fact that he was playing with one of the world's greatest football players.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely two ways to look at that, right? Like you nailed it. Like there's hidden upside in there as well. Like, what if he was the number one? What does that actually look like? I think as well. Like I think if he stalls from being like, okay, we are happy that he is our best wide receiver. If he does stall, it's going to be what James said with the run after catch. I'm eye for eye on that, and the fact that he is probably going to be a little bit easier to game plan against. I think all the best wide receivers in the league move around so much. They're great to all three levels. You can funnel the offense through them because you can do so much with them. I think that's probably where he would stall out. But yeah, I think it's all a very fascinating conversation. You guys absolutely nailed that. So I have my next questions for Easton here about Calvin Ridley. Gets brought back. I think a lot of people assumed he was not going to be back with the team. What's kind of the Spark Notes version on what went wrong last year, and if there's any reason to believe in a bounce back year this year with him?
Well, the Spark Notes version is that he got a soft tissue injury because he's old, and then he came back, and on the first play, he broke his leg because he got unlucky. So when he was on the field, which was not a lot, he was inconsistent, and that's the part that actually matters from a football standpoint because he's rehabbing from the leg. He's back. He did some of his first team reps yesterday. I love the way that he's positioned on this roster this year as compared to the last 2 years. I think that this is, at this point in his career, the ideal way to have him situated, and it's an ideal amount of pressure you're putting on him to contribute to make the offense work, whereas in the past he's been a requirement, and now he can really just be an icing on top of the cake guy. Like, he can be the turbo boost button that allows you to be that much better of an offense in a game where he happens to be really, really good. Because when he's on his game, he can do things that no one else in this receiver room can do. His movement ability, even at his age, is still, I mean, he's a first-team all-world practice player. He's unbelievable. Take anybody to one Calvin Ridley practice, and they're like, that guy's the best receiver I've ever seen. It does not translate in that way to the field very often, but when it does, he can handle volume, and he can create game-changing plays. He is just so inconsistent, both in terms of his physical ability to like get open, make catches, but also mentally. He's just not somebody that is the most mentally steady guy in the world, or at least he hasn't been here with the Titans. So that's what went wrong last year, is that he was following up a 1,000-yard season where it felt like he's back, even though he's getting old, with a lot of, I think, self-doubt, a lot of up and down that was marred by injury issues. And now I think there's way less pressure on him. So I'm curious to see what that looks like.
Has he been at practice looking good, or like, yeah? Okay.
Yeah, again, first team drills of practice yesterday. They're still easing him in, but he looks, I was talking to a doctor source that we have here, because I am not a doctor, notably. And based on the timeline for the recovery of his leg, he was saying that the amount that he's doing in practice right now could clearly be categorized as a little ahead of schedule. So,
yeah. Cool. All right, I'm going to go to James for some more draft thoughts here, flipping over a little bit more to the defensive side of things. So they ended up trading up, taking Keldrick Falk at the end of the first round, quite possibly the most polarizing prospect, just in terms of some people did like him. The majority of people did not like him. So, James, where did you land in that conversation on Keldrick Falk? Were you on the hate train, or were you on him a little bit more? And what are your kind of expectations here in the first couple of years? And the part of this question is here, do you see him as a little bit redundant with John Franklin Myers maybe in that role, or do you think they're going to be able to find a way to get him out there?
Yeah, I mean, so everything in the draft is relative, and I think a lot of the negativity towards Keldrick Falk, which I was absolutely on board with, is because he came into the season as this top 5 prospect, consensus wise. And he was talked about oh my God, this is a freak athlete. And if he puts it together, he's going to take over college football. And it's is he a freak athlete? I don't see that at all. So I always had him in the late teens to 20s, finished with him at 23. By the end of the draft process, that's kind of where he was viewed. If I look at the consensus board, he was 19th on the consensus board, which I think is appropriate. So I guess I was, by the end of the year, I was pretty much even with consensus on Keldrick Falk, and don't hate the pick at all. I think as far as redundancy with John Franklin Myers, absolutely. I view his best long-term position fit as somebody that's going to be playing inside the tackle. He doesn't have the juice to threaten the outside shoulder in the NFL, in my opinion. And that's important not only because like you want to be able to win around the arc, but that's how you get tackles into like, deep vertical sets and start like using the flash bait and doing all these things that are it's a rock, paper, scissors game. And so if they're worried about speed, they're going to stop bracing for power, and it doesn't set up the other moves as effectively. So I just don't really think the skill set is going to play at like a 9 or 5 technique really. But
it's like facing a pitcher who doesn't have a breaking ball.
Exactly. Yeah. I don't watch baseball, but that sounds right.
Yeah.
But on the inside, I think he does he is athletic when matched up against interior blockers. I think he's got the quickness. Do really like his power profile, and then what he gives you in the run game is undeniable. So I think he is redundant has like a negative connotation. I think I view him very similarly to John Franklin Myers as far as what their long-term position is going to be. For the short term, like there's no reason you can't have both of those guys on the field on passing downs, and then whatever their early down rotation looks like. I think Keldrick Folk will eventually be a part of that, because one of the things that one of his biggest values that he's bringing to the table is how sturdy he is in run support.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. I was thinking back on it. I was like, I feel like there's been one Eric Armstead. There's been one John Franklin Myers. They haven't done that with 2 guys at the same time. And maybe that just creates a force multiplying effect, and you double the impact of having a good role player like that, or maybe it at least a little bit more.
I mean, John Franklin Myers, I think for right now is a much better pass rusher than Keldrick Folk. So I was going through his tape last week, and actually very impressed with him. But I think Folk will be more of like a developmental, like mix him in, and could maybe. The thing with the Titans is that they don't have like unless Femi Oladejo breaks out, they don't really have like a bendy edge burner type. So that's to me priority 1 for next year. And you might get some kind of funky rotations with just how all of their skill set is just like big body interior rushers.
Yeah, that's a good call in JFM. I think Denver's going to miss him a lot more than people realize. I'm going to ask the same question to you, James, about Anthony Hill here, where you kind of had him ranked. And what are your year 1 expectations? Do you see him cracking the starting lineup year 1, or is it more of a long-term play with him?
Yeah, I was not really an Anthony Hill Jr. guy. Still ended up having him. They actually took him about where I had him. I had him 69th on my board. So another one of those where it ended up kind of falling into place. His best moments are awesome in coverage and run support. Snap to snap is just extremely inconsistent to me. I felt like he was a player who was like, and I felt a similar way about Josiah Trotter from Missouri, where it's like people kind of overrated his instincts because he was called on so many run blitzes. So it's like he's on a run blitz and they're like, oh my God, he sees it instantly. It's like, he was shooting the B gap, like 100% regardless of what happened. So I think there was a lot of that. Very, very up and down in terms of his physicality and willingness to take on blocks. Like, there are absolutely moments where he'll blow up a puller and really looks like a tone-setting physical force, and then other times where he's kind of shying away from contact. Same thing with coverage, like the Georgia game, where he read that breaking route and zoned off to get the interception. There are some really high-end moments, but then a lot of just being a sitting duck in zone coverage, having no idea what's developing behind him. He does have the athleticism to run the pull, and he is pretty rangy in coverage. So there's some natural talent to work with there. But I would be surprised if he was a positive impact year 1. as a pass rusher, I don't think that he has like, there have been some people that want him to move to edge. I don't think he has that kind of skill set, but he will be a really good blitzer. So that can probably add some production early on.
Yeah, it sounds like we saw him like identically, because I had him like right there, like low 60s, and got a lot of hate when I was like, he doesn't really know what he's doing in run defense yet. Like all they did was just had him getting upfield, and exactly like you said, it's like, well, you're seeing a run blitz, you're not seeing him diagnose things quickly. All right, let's end on some fun here. Let's do some superlative award winners here, and I'm gonna put you guys on the spot where like no analysis needed, just say the name, and we'll just kind of rip through this because we're right about 30 minutes. But I want to get some takes here. So, breakout offense for the Titans, not including rookies.
J.C. Latham.
Love that. Glad I don't have to say it. How about Gunnar Helm?
Okay, and I actually like this because it leaves a little mystery out there of like why you think it. But I think
Titans fans think J.C. Latham sucks, which is crazy town. They're wrong.
Yeah.
Okay, then defense. Breakout defense.
Kevin Winston Jr.
Cedric Gray. Who'd you say, Easton?
Kevin Winston Jr. And at this point, we're just naming like second-year players.
Yeah.
Okay, fantasy MVP, kind of considering where they'll roughly get drafted as well. Like, who's going to bring value to you in your fantasy drafts?
Right now, it's Carnell Tate. His draft ADP, I think I saw the Underdog guys tweeting about this the other day. It's much lower than it should be. Draft Carnell Tate.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, Carnell Tate was the only one that I could possibly come up with for this answer. If not Carnell Tate, then pass.
Alec Iamaner is going to save your fantasy team. Okay.
Biggest wild card / X factor. Biggest pivotal factor who's going to determine the success of the team's season.
Have we heard of Austin Sloatman? That guy.
Okay.
The center for those uninitiated.
Yep.
Yeah, besides the interior O-line, Jermaine Johnson, maybe if he can get back to full strength.
I like that. Okay, and then unsung hero.
Oh, that's a good
one. I went
one.
with Peter Skoronsky. Just a rock solid player.
He's like the unsung hero of the
Annual
NFL.
answer.
I never hear anybody mention him.
I'll say Tony Pollard because I've seen a lot of Tony Pollard hate recently, which is crazy because he's one of two running backs that's reached 1,000 yards in 4 straight seasons. The other one is Derrick Henry, for those wondering.
It's like Tony's the Brandon Cooks of running backs.
Yeah, man, he's just he's a lunch pail guy. You get what you need.
Yeah. All right, great answers. I love it. Thank you guys so much. This was a success, I would say. I think this was a ton of fun. So thank you so much for hopping on, providing your insight to the Titans Deep Dive. And thank you everybody for tuning in.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
So a massive thanks to James and Easton. That was a very insightful, very fun interview. But let's tie a ribbon on this deep dive. First things first, we're going to recap their strengths, weaknesses, and most importantly, those big pivotal factors for the Titans that will ultimately decide the success of this team. So strengths, it's very coaching focused, which I think you could tell from the beginning of this video. I'm very fired up about what these coaches are bringing to the table. So I have both offense and defensive coaching as a strength for this team, which is very important. Beyond that, I said D-line run defense. I think they have plenty of guys up front to make early downs really tough on opposing offenses, and that's a really good asset for Robert Saleh to start to shape his defense around. So you've got some legit strengths for this team already. Weaknesses, though, you have aspects of this team that have a lot to prove. Quarterback, Cam Ward, is still a relative weakness until proven otherwise, as optimistic as I can be about his future. As the 26th ranked quarterback for me right now, that's not going to quite cut it, obviously. We need to see more. Offensive line just might end up the year as a weakness, to be honest. That's where I'm really worried. If this team can start to get closer to their ceiling as a team. Secondary, I think, is a relative weakness. But like Cam Ward and the quarterback, secondary is going to show up as a wild card where there's hope that you can get through the year And those can at least become non-weaknesses, if not strengths, but especially just not holding the team back is important, obviously. Additional wildcards for this team would be the weaponry, which has a lot of further upside baked into it, and the defensive line with some different pieces. Jermaine Johnson especially, could he surprise? Could Keldrick Falk surprise? There's some aspects of that defensive line that could make things even better up front there and make the entire D-line a real legit strength for this team. Whereas right now I just list the run defense side of things there. But ultimately there's definitely a path there where this ends up a very encouraging young team that, yeah, maybe needs to do some more work on their O-line, and that might hold them back certainly at times in the season. But you hit some of those green lights, you can start to see the path for Tennessee to surprise this year. But let's take a look at their schedule and how reasonable it is to think that this team might beat expectations here. So they drew the NFC East and the AFC North, which I would say pretty balanced in terms of difficulty. Neither of those divisions stand out as cakewalks, neither stand out as dominant divisions. Likewise with their own division. The AFC South is certainly good, but not insurmountable, which means for me, it's less about the schedule and much more about Tennessee standing on business and taking care of the things they need to take care of. Some schedules you can look at and start to make the excuses or see an opportunity with a super easy schedule for why things are going to go well. Not really the case with Tennessee here. I don't have a whole lot of commentary in terms of how things shook down for them with the schedule. And with that schedule, you end up with an over-under of 6.5 wins, which is pretty solid. I think that's a decently high over-under and probably shows that there's people in the market that believe in this Titans team, that certainly believe in this coaching staff and Cam Ward. And I would just say, I'm kind of in that crowd. I think somewhere between 6 to 8 wins is probably a pretty safe projection for this Titans team. I do think they take a step forward from where they've been, certainly the last couple of years. I'm going to put my final stamp, my final prediction at 7 wins, which would go over for this team, but just barely over. Not really projecting them winning the division or being like a Cinderella playoff team necessarily. As far as ceiling and floor are concerned, I don't know if their ceiling is that much higher than this sort of optimistic prediction on them. There's obviously your dream scenarios out there, but I do just see a lot of aspects of this team that it's pretty unreasonable that everything comes together in that sense in one season. So I'm predicting them actually a little bit closer to what I view as their ceiling, which is the equivalent of me kind of sticking my neck out for a team a little bit more if we're having a little fun with a predictive segment here. Meanwhile, their floor is not great. If Cam Ward doesn't take that step forward behind a bad offensive line, and you end up a little bit more lackluster, maybe from more of a pass defense standpoint, even with Robert Saleh there, if the edge rushers just aren't getting it done and your secondary has more of a bad outcome and is struggling out there, yeah, I could see probably about a 4-win season, even if that's obviously not my prediction here. But I do think a 7-win season, as I'm predicting, with Cam Ward looking good and this team hitting some of these green lights, this could be kind of a team that's a year away that heads into the offseason pretty stoked on what's coming. And even ranking 26th and saying over on their over-under, I think does leave me a tick higher on this Titans team as we head into the year. I know a lot of people thought this team would have been revealed a spot or two ago. So that's fun. But let's finish with my team superlatives for the Titans. So for team MVP, had to go with Jeffrey Simmons. He's quite clearly the best player on this team and on a Robert Saleh defense. Hopefully a few more eyeballs on the Titans this year. As long as Simmons can do what he did last year, he might even take the crown this year as the surefire best interior D lineman in the league. So pretty easy choice there. Biggest wild card, obviously it is Cam Ward, but that's why I don't select quarterbacks for this award, because it's too easy to do that. Any young quarterback that's unproven with upside is going to be the biggest wild card for any team. He does need to be mentioned here, but I can't pick him for the award. So I actually went with Kevin Winston Jr. because I also see him as an incredibly high upside young player for the first time healthy heading into a season in a couple of years, going back to college. Technically, I think he was healthy heading into his final year at Penn State, but he went down like the second game of the year. Regardless, he's finally healthy, and I can't wait to see what he does in a Robert Saleh defense. So he's my biggest wild card for the team. And a wild card, too, in the sense that, like, to be fair, what we saw from him in coverage last year was pretty rough. So if he's an issue there, you're left with a whole lot of meh in that safety room. But then for breakout offense, this is where Cam Ward will show up here. I'm going to choose to buy in to him taking that step. Really like the pairing with Brian Dable. I think there's enough weaponry here. I really do. The O-line's an issue, but he does a really good job with his pocket presence and his ability to extend plays that I think he can survive it. Last year, he had no O-line, no pass catchers, and no play calling. At least now he has 2 of the 3. And hopefully better defensive support as well, if you want to count that as a fourth factor. Breakout defense, doubling down on this and going with Kevin Winston Jr. Maybe I'm just too attached to my draft takes here and there's nothing here, but I really like the fit, as I've said, in a Robert Saleh defense. The upside is tremendous. I didn't see a ton of glaring options for other choices either. So we're going double down on Kevin Winston. And then best rookie, pretty easy here. Carnell Tate, pretty self-explanatory, honestly, just because of everything we said about Keldrick Falk and Anthony Hill, I think are more future plays for this team. And then fantasy MVP, Tony Pollard right now is RB 29 in average draft position. Make that make sense. 4 straight 1,000-yard rushing seasons. I like Tyjae Spears, but with those injury concerns, it's not like he's going to overtake Tony Pollard. The offense should be better this year. I don't get that. Is he going to be a top 15 running back? He might be close, but probably not. But top 20, top 24? Can he be an RB2? Like, if we're talking fantasy football, that's pretty crazy. So, pretty easy choice on Tony Pollard there. But that's going to do it. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Titans fans, I hope you enjoyed. Non-Titans fans, I hope you learned a thing or two about a team that nobody seems to want to talk about. Happy to be able to spend 3 hours on the Tennessee Titans. When do you get to see that? You'll love to see it. But let me know your comments down below. What you think of the analysis, what you think of the ranking. Who do you think comes next in this series? Going to be working hard this week, hoping to see an uptick in the frequency in which these get dropped here over the next couple of weeks. Trying to get ahead on things because if you hadn't heard, there's a baby on the way here in the Whitman household, so very, very excited for that. But definitely trying to get as many of these out here in the next couple of weeks before my world gets flipped upside down, man. So a lot of exciting stuff going on. Thank you so much for watching. Please do hit that like button on the way out. Really helps me out. And I'll see you soon. Cheers.